Hey there, SHIRO listeners. SaturnDave here, reminding you that you must play Sega Saturn, and that it's contributions from listeners like you that help keep this and our other shows hosted and available on demand, in addition to our website, SegaSaturnShiro.com, where you can find all of the most up-to-date news and information from around the Sega Saturn scene. If you'd like to show your support and gain access to several perks, visit patreon.com/SHIRO Media Group to become a Patreon supporter. If a monthly donation isn't possible, no worries. We still value your support in liking and sharing our content on social media and joining our Discord community to become a part of the Saturn conversation. Thank you for being a loyal listener and a part of this great community. And as always, everyone, welcome to Editor's Corner. I'm SaturnDave. We got TraynoCo here as my co-host.
Yo.
And special guest today is John Linneman from all the way over in Germany. Thanks, John, for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, of course. It's great to be here, guys. It's bright and early, but I'm ready to talk some Saturn and other stuff. Because why not?
Dark and late over here. We both got coffee, though. We got our coffee and it's keeping me going. I even have like an extra thermos to fill myself up.
Just in case.
I need it. I pretty much live on coffee.
Komm aus das deutschen Retro-Scene.
Yeah, it's over here, man. Retro gaming in Germany is pretty big, I would say. There's a ton of stuff happening over here. We have these retro Börzes every week, or not every week, like every month, basically, where people from around the country come together and they all set up in these large meeting places with tons of stuff to sell. And it's just awesome to go there and check it out, talk with people. I have a blast there.
Okay, so John, wait a second. Where are you originally from in the States?
Oh, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Bengal fan?
Yeah. Fair.
Kind of.
No, I enjoy the Bengals.
Okay.
When they're doing well, I am anyway. You know,
Reds, maybe
fair weather. Reds.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a baseball guy.
I enjoy it.
I enjoy football, but baseball. I like going to the games, but.
yeah. Baseball. The game. I'm with you with that. Like the baseball is fun when you see it in the games.
Yeah.
The hot dogs and food, but for some reason watching it live is like maybe I'll just like do something else that's not that.
I used to think the same thing. Like, I think watching chess is kind of boring. Like, but there are people who like to watch chess. So I don't know. Like,
chess though. Chess is fun.
When I married my wife, I got huge into baseball and I enjoyed watching it. But anyway, yeah. So she actually got me into baseball. I wasn't like as big of a baseball fan. But how do you get from Cincinnati to Germany?
Well, in my case, it's really simple. It's just because of my wife's job. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
She is French and wanted to come back to Europe, basically, because we were in the States back in 2013, and an opportunity opened up with her company, and we came on by. That's how it went. So, and that's also when I joined what I'm doing now, which is Digital Foundry.
Is that what led to you hooking up with Digital Foundry, going to Germany? Yep. Really?
Oh, no. So working in the US, I was doing IT stuff, basically. And obviously the job was not transferable, so I had to quit, right? And then when we moved over here, we first moved to France and then to Germany after that. But either way, it was like, well, I need something new to do. And Richard at DF was just like looking for somebody at that time. He posted a sort of a job listing online, and I just was like, well, I read that stuff. I like that. Let's do it. And
that's amazing.
It was really that simple. I was just like, submitted, like, I wouldn't even say a resume because my resume wasn't really that relevant to this, right? Yeah. So, but it kind of worked out, and here we are.
He hired the right guy.
I hope so.
Well, you got my vote. I mean, we both love your work. I've loved your work for years, and just I don't know. We're all nerds. I just like all the same stuff, you know. And all the videos you do are just like right up my alley. You're a Sega fan, I take it, because you definitely have a pretty heavy bias, and you're also a Saturn fan.
Big time
Saturn fan and Sega arcade fan. You've done a lot of Daytona stuff. But you go deep into a lot of consoles. I mean, in fact, right now you're cooking up something for 3DO, right?
Well, it's more. I'm working on the Road Rash video, which is not. I mean,
Okay.
it's the entire series.
Sure.
It's not just the 3DO game. So I'm going from the Genesis games, 3DO up through like Jailbreak and all that kind of stuff. So
nice.
it's all in there.
Dave always tries to like has been trying to sell me on it hard, and he's kind of winning me over. There's some really cool stuff on there, like Police Knots and stuff like that. So it's definitely something I'd love to get into eventually, but it's definitely on that lower totem.
It's not a Jaguar. Let's put it that way. It's like
It's not a Jaguar. I mean, at least it's not a CDI. A CDI, I have a mission to break every single one of them in existence. So hopefully I can accomplish it.
The big argument with the 3DO is, they're all multi-plat games and you can play them better somewhere else, right? Which I totally get. And in a lot of cases, I think that's probably true. But there are some exceptions. There are some fringe exceptions, like Alone in the Dark, the original Alone in the Dark, which is actually pretty decent on the 3DO. And it's a good way to play it if you're not going to play like it on DOS or something like that. It's a nice console way to play the game.
Actually, I forgot about that. That's a good point.
Yeah, I found the Saturn version of Alone in the Dark 2 not so long ago for quite cheap.
Oh, it's terrible.
And I was like, oh, this was like $5. Let me check it out.
Oh my
and I
God.
popped it in and I was like, what did they do?
But it's not that much better on 3DO, honestly. It is terrible.
No, I know.
I think
Alone in the Dark 2 did not translate well, unfortunately.
No, I mean, if you're going to play it at all, play it on PC, but even then, it's not as good as the first game. The first game is just kind of like a good picture of that early survival horror. And
How about that third one, though? Have you played
Dreamcast? Wait, what are we talking
Alone
about?
in the Dark 3.
No, I haven't.
It's the one set in the West, like the Wild West kind of setting.
No, I haven't played that one. Oh, wow. Okay.
I think that was PC only, and it's quite interesting, I would say. It's an unusual tone that you don't usually see from these sort of horror games, right? It's like haunted Wild West. Like it's not actually the Wild West, but it's set in like sort of an old West style town.
What year did that come out?
Maybe like 95, maybe
95.
Okay, I was gonna say maybe like tied in the Wild Wild West or something.
No,
I play a Will Smith Wild Wild West game.
That's completely off my radar, to be honest with you.
Yeah, if you like Alone in the Dark, you should at least check it out, just because it's so unusual that they made a game like that at the time.
I'm actually intrigued now. I'm gonna go.
Yeah.
Let me go add that to the list real quick. I'm interested because I'm in Arizona right now, so it's always desert. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I think just because of the time Saturn and PlayStation came out, and then you had shortly after you'd have like Resident Evil, and that kind of revolutionized the survival horror genre. And the next time I noticed Alone in the Dark was like when they put it out on Dreamcast. Well, obviously it was on PC, and there was like I forget what it's called.
PS1, The New Nightmare.
The New Nightmare. Yeah, The New Nightmare. Yeah, no, that number 3 just completely skipped my radar, so I will definitely have to check that out. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's on Steam right now. It's like what was it like $14, $15? Probably
Wow, I didn't even realize it was on Steam. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably wait for a Steam sale, get it for like $2, and then that way, if you want to take a risk on it, Dave, you won't be out the money. But
that's cool.
15 seems fair.
So I don't know. I don't have an outline or anything like that. I'm just curious. Like, what would you say your favorite console is if you had to choose?
Oh man.
Or is that just too hard of a question?
It would be a 3-way tie between Mega Drive, Saturn, and PlayStation 2. I would say.
That's pretty good. That's actually a pretty good opinion.
Those are all killer choices.
So
well, Genesis or Mega Drive and PS2 are like obvious, like solid choices. Excellent libraries. Saturn, I'm biased, but I mean, like some might argue just if they only had like the Western.
I was going to say, yes, if it's American Saturn, then it would not be on the list.
It would not be on the list, right? Yeah, because I mean, we got 200 something games and not all of them are great. But
no, not even close.
I mean, to be fair, all those like 1,000 in Japan, I don't think maybe even half of them are pretty good anyways, because pachinko's, dating sims,
mahjong, yeah.
But there's still like a ton of stuff on there.
Oh, there's just so much.
Yeah, ratio wise, yeah, probably they at least have 200 plus good games on there compared to the 200 ones we get in the US.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, I have 212 Saturn games and only like maybe 25 are American. So it's mostly Japanese over here.
So what is it about the Saturn that you like? Like what draws you to it?
It is this. I love that period of time in gaming. It was very experimental and interesting, and there was a lot of great stuff happening. But it was also like the top tier for 2D gaming, which I love. And it's just you kind of get. I always kind of describe Saturn 2D as kind of like Capcom CPS2, but with a few more bells and whistles.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
But like at home,
sure.
And there wasn't really much else doing that at the time. I mean, the PlayStation can do decent 2D, but not. It does struggle to do some of the stuff that Saturn does, right? And N64 is just like less than 10 games.
Not even in the conversation.
So
you tell you about that. N64 got the best Castlevania game. Come on, guys.
Well, I'll be honest. I'm actually
You're a funny guy, Pat.
It's no Symphony of the Night, but I actually like Castlevania on 64 somewhat.
It's not terrible.
I think it's like a solid B- B game kind of thing, you know, where it's got. Once you get into it, it has some good stuff going for it, I think. But,
definitely a C+.
Yeah, no, it's in that range.
It was a bit hard to control, as I remember, you know, like, whereas like Symphony of the Night is just...
It's perfect. But if you go to 64 now, you'd actually probably see like, oh, you know, just with years of 3D experience, it's perfectly easy enough to control.
This is true. Yeah. I mean, putting it into context that it was a brand new kind of dynamic.
Brand new plane we live in.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, even the 3D stuff, and you did a great video on this about how Saturn is basically just really, really powerful at generating sprites and throwing them up on the screen really fast. So fast that it can just warp them and create a bunch of 3D, basically like perspective corrected 3D graphics.
Right.
But it's all sprites, right? And that's crazy. Like it gives it a flavor of 3D that's different from like the PlayStation. The PlayStation has its own like little idiosyncrasies in its 3D and stuff like that. And they all have like a flavor. Like, you know, a Nintendo 64 game when you look at it. It's got that kind of like Vaseline blur. I mean, if you're not using any kind of...
Hey, credit where credit's due. I think Shadowgate 64 is my favorite horror game on the N64, or if it counts as one, I think.
Do you like any of the 3D stuff, or do you mostly stick to like the 2D stuff on Saturn? Yeah, on Saturn.
Yeah. I enjoy this 3D stuff as well. And, you know, so that's the thing, is a lot of stuff that's 3D on Saturn still actually runs pretty well today.
Yeah.
So it always felt very playable, I would say, in a way that isn't always true of like N64, for instance.
Yeah.
Right. So
I definitely feel like with the PS1, they tapped it out. Like they made games well into the early 2000s, you know, and they pretty much just squeezed every last ounce of what that console was capable of. You look at games like Gran Turismo 2 and I don't know, Vagrant Story and stuff like that, and it's really just squeezing every last ounce of power. And then with the Saturn, there's a ton of extra untapped potential that they just never really... I mean, we've had developers go on record saying it's like a sandbox, right? Like, yes, there are some bottlenecks with the bus contention, you know, but aside from that, there's just a ton of like endless potential.
The thing about Saturn though is that because it's all like sprites and the way all that works, like doing things like lighting and shading on 3D objects, it doesn't really seem to work the same way that it really should. So 3D games on Saturn have this very unique kind of full bright look to them,
right?
Where it's almost garish at times, but it somehow looks still appealing and unique in its own way.
Which is why games like Burning Rangers are so iconic and look so good. They pop because they are garish, bright, just really, really in your face colors. Arguably doesn't do as well on the games that are supposed to be like really gritty and dystopian, although I'd argue that Team Andromeda was able to make it work with Panzer Dragoon Zwei and Panzer Dragoon Saga. But you're absolutely right. Like, that's one of the greatest things about the Saturn 3D games is just the really bright, popping, colorful stuff. It's really more of the like the character of the 3D that it has. But
that's kind of why like something like Sega Rally works, because it's just bright, vibrant colors. Doesn't do a lot of like subtle shading and shadows. It's just like bam in your face. You know, you're racing, there's rally cars, let's go. And it really, man, it gets close to matching the arcade in many ways. Like,
it's a shame they couldn't really put that effort towards Daytona USA on that.
Oh, I'm sure they would have or wanted to, but because it was so early.
It was so early.
I kind of don't blame them for it. Also, Daytona, you know, when you look at Sega Rally is a rally game where there's maybe one or two cars on the screen at any point, and Daytona is like, here's a grid of 20 cars.
Yeah.
or whatever,
There's a lot of
racing
stuff
around this
popping
track.
in all over the
They
place.
actually managed to clean up the visuals quite a bit for CCE, but then they missed
But it plays so bad.
They
Yeah.
missed a trick by not actually maintaining.
They're this
They
close,
really, all
this
they
close.
really needed to do was just focus on the graphics. Don't touch the music. Don't touch the
The
gameplay.
engine's good. Just make the engine better.
Yeah.
Graphics better. We're good. Don't touch the
I mean,
music.
and for that matter, if Saturn had continued, I hate the shoulda, coulda, woulda, but if it had, they could have done like a Daytona 2, you know, like they could have ported that or ported other.
So I don't think Daytona 2 would have made sense because the tracks became so much more complex thanks to Model 3.
Just more complex. That's true.
Instead, it should have been Dreamcast. Like
I would just say, yeah,
like
they should have done that for a Dreamcast.
the version we got on Dreamcast is fine enough, I guess.
Sure.
But like, I would have rather they did like a Daytona Complete, right, where it's Daytona 1 and 2 combined into a Dreamcast game. You know,
Absolutely.
the thing about Dreamcast, I did eventually get used to that Dreamcast version because you can, once I realized that you have to press up on the analog stick, you know that? Because like if you just try to play it by pressing left and right on the stick, it causes your car to like go out of control.
Yeah.
But they designed it so you control it like it's a steering wheel. So you hold the stick forward
And then you
slowly
just kind of-
roll it left and right. And once you
Yeah,
get that,
that's
it's like,
true,
all right,
yeah.
it plays okay.
It still doesn't feel like what we wanted. It was
You got to get the Dreamcast wheel, folks. This is how you play these games.
leaves a lot to be desired, but you're absolutely right. Daytona 2 would have been a home run on the Dreamcast. It could have handled it. It would have done a great job, but yeah, that's kind of too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you have like a favorite Saturn game? I'm just curious.
No way.
No way.
It's impossible to say that because it's such a varied system and there's so many different takes on this. It's if I say, you know, any random game, I'm going to be leaving something really important on the floor. Like, how could you ever like not say something positive about Virtua Fighter 2, right? Like, I wouldn't
Right.
say Virtua Fighter 2 is my favorite game on there, right? But I feel like not including something like that in there, given how important it was and how well it plays, like I can't do favorites. The closest thing I would say is the original Grandia.
You have like sentimentality for that, or you just come to like it?
I
Okay.
do.
Oh, okay.
So I was following it back in the 90s when it came out, and it was a game that when I first started to like try to study Japanese, that was one of the first games I was poking at, and at the time I really couldn't understand anything. And then, you know, over the years, you know, I've improved enough where I was able to play through it in its original Japanese and enjoy it, and that was very rewarding. And
That's
I could
awesome.
feel the building blocks of getting to that point, and then, you know, finally being able to do that. Once I actually finally did that, then it's like, oh, hey, now there's an English translation.
Yeah.
So,
It's like, oh man, I've worked this so hard. But
but obviously,
Speaking of which, we were able to play the fan translation by.
I did. I played that next, and I was like, dang, this is really good.
Yeah.
And it's just such a shame that this is not what we got in the US. I mean, again, it would have been too little too late. Saturn was dead. Nobody was going to invest the money necessary
Right.
to localize that game at that time, right? Maybe working designs if they had been like kind of encouraged to do so.
They weren't,
But
if they're boxy with Brewing Stolar all the time.
Sony did it for PlayStation, right?
Sony did it in turn. Yeah, they did their own translation work.
So it wasn't like they were going to share.
Yeah,
They
unfortunately,
weren't going to share.
No.
And honestly,
best-
you know, for working designs, I think the game might have just been a little bit too big for them at the time.
Oh,
like
yeah.
in terms of just the raw amount
It's
of
huge.
text and
Yeah.
and all the voice stuff. And it's a
all the
gigantic
hacking,
game.
yeah.
So I feel like
It looks amazing though, like from that opening live, you know, real-time cutscene flying through the town. Of course, it looks great on PlayStation as well, but just on Saturn, it definitely has that look to it.
so I've talked about this before, but one of the reasons that game looks so good on Saturn versus PlayStation is that it's VDP2.
Okay, yeah.
So the thing about VDP2, obviously, as you guys know, it's basically like a 2D rasterizing chip, kind of. You know, it's designed to perform all the actions of classic arcade and home systems where it's tile map based. So like you're basically putting tiles like artwork onto like a flat plane, and then you can scroll it, you can
Rotate it.
Mode 7 style it, you can rotate it, you can skew it, zoom it, all that kind of stuff. It's really well suited for that. But the problem is on most 3D games, like why didn't they use VDP2 on Daytona? You'd say, Well, because Daytona has a fully 3D track with all this elevation that doesn't work there. It's
Right.
not. They use it for the sky, but you can't use it for the floor. You can't do the ground with it because it's not really designed to be used that way.
Right.
But with Grandia, many of its maps, you have the ground, the base, like the floor of the map, and it's flat, and they build geometry on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
So they use VDP2 as the basis for the ground in many of those areas. Yes, they build up elevation with the 3D stuff, but most of those areas have big flat open plains. Saturn can do that super well. They can have a gigantic...
It's like free, basically.
Yeah. And so you look at the first town in Grandia, like Parm, and it's... they have all these intricate, like, streets and metalwork and all this stuff. It's just a 2D tile map, right? But on PlayStation, it doesn't have the ability to do those large flat tile maps. It has to render it out all using basically triangles. So so to bring it to PlayStation, they had to brute force it. So there's like way more polygons in a scene on PlayStation because they didn't have that equivalent of VDP2. But that also affects memory, right? Because it's all 3D. They don't have like the memory to be able to do it as intricately as Saturn. So they couldn't actually just duplicate that tile map. And so if you actually look at the ground in Parm on PlayStation 1, it's actually kind of a garbled mess. Like it looks fine at a glance, but it doesn't logically make sense. Like it doesn't connect all the roads and paths and everything together in a way where you'd be like, oh, that makes sense. It just looks like a pattern of meadow and grass and stuff that you're walking on without any sort of logic. Whereas on Saturn, there's actual paths and thought put into the design because they arted it up like a 2D game, and then they built the geometry on top of it. And they do that everywhere in the game. And PlayStation just can't actually do that. So yeah, it's one of those cases where you just have this they actually use the Saturn in a smart way to produce something that looks awesome that none of the other systems could do. That also applies to things like water. You know that, right? You've seen the water in Saturn Grandia. They use that one 2D VDP2 trick again. You saw it in like Panzer Dragoon 2 as well.
Yeah.
And again, can't do it on PlayStation, so it's just like a flat water texture instead.
That was really Saturn's strength, I would say, is VDP2. That was kind of like the card up their sleeve, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, without that, they'd be in deep trouble.
Definitely. Yeah. Because, I would say that it's pretty amazing what they were able to get the PlayStation to do. And you're right, like
absolutely
brute forcing a lot of things. Sometimes it was just like really clever programming, like Naughty Dog. They've gone on record saying they just pretty much threw out the book and just said, we're just going to work outside the constraints of what Sony wants.
Do it, honestly, especially if you have a lot of good programmers.
Exactly.
If you know what you're doing, like as a programmer myself, I would rather have that openness, and I think a lot of people would prefer that instead of like being constrained to, oh yeah, here's this engine or here's this this guide or whatever to pretty much work around. It's like, let's go outside this a little bit. Let's see what we can do. To the point where it's like, oh yeah, Sony or Naughty Dog broke the PlayStation, the PlayStation once they updated. It's like, probably not do that again.
Yeah,
but I mean, with the Saturn, it's having that VDP2. It really helped with like the 3D stuff. It's funny that a game like Castlevania Symphony of the Night should have been perfect on Saturn, right? But I mean, they kind of needed to just wrap it up and get it out.
So I think the PlayStation actually is more impressive at 2D than people give it credit for because of the fact that it's brute forcing this stuff. Because again, what Saturn's doing with VDP2 is that's just a hardware feature, right? Like they designed classic 2D style hardware and it does exactly what it's supposed to. And it's really awesome at that. Sony didn't do that. So developers basically had to find another way. And that's what the fast 2D mode, if you look in the technical manuals, it's literally just slapping two unshaded triangles together. And then you have a square sprite, right? Or like a tile. And so they're basically just all the 2D stuff is essentially like unshaded 3D graphics. It's not really 3D, like it is actually mapped out on like a 2D space, but it's just two triangles, right? So they're just kind of brute forcing everything 2D that way.
Like a texture, basically?
It's kind of like a texture, yeah.
As like a texture mapped to a face?
It's kind of like that, exactly.
That's crazy. You can't make a box without using triangles, right? With the PlayStation. Everything is triangles. So
it's like, the Saturn and memory and all this kind of stuff. It's more about the fact that, like, if you have like a 2D game on Saturn, like a fighting game, they can just do the traditional 2D style backgrounds with like tiles, and then you have like sprites on top of that, where PlayStation has to do everything using all these like 3D double triangle kind of setup. And it's just more expensive memory wise, so they're never going to be able to match it. I would say it's more like the engineers on the PlayStation doing 2D did amazing work considering the way that hardware is designed. And on Saturn, it was like they're just taking advantage of what the Saturn is designed to do. Sega designed it with 2D games in mind, and it has proper 2D support in a way that the competition didn't. Like N64, nope. 3DO, definitely not. It's horrible with 2D graphics. Even the Jaguar, it's bad at 2D in the end, it turns out. Like,
I mean, the Jaguar's bad at everything, but I mean, that's besides the point, though.
Yeah.
But when you see a 2D game on Saturn that kind of drops the ball, that's when people go like, it has no excuse,
and
right?
I think it's because you look at Symphony of the Night was a PlayStation game, right? So they'd have to readapt the way they do the 2D backgrounds, I guess.
They couldn't port that over. They had to just basically rebuild it.
It also has that stupid resolution problem where
where it like stretches the pixels or squeezes.
It's because so the main issue there, and this was with some Capcom had this problem too with stuff like the Rockman X3 port and in the Ghouls and Ghosts collection when they have the Super NES game in there. So the Saturn didn't support a 256 wide pixel mode.
Right.
And I've talked about that before where, you know, Super NES, PC Engine, they were all 256 by 224 is like their most common resolution. PlayStation also supports that. Saturn did not. They don't have that video mode. So on PlayStation, anytime you'd have like a Super NES kind of game on there, you could actually just display it properly. And I think with Symphony of the Night, what happened there is that they started from pixel art that was designed for the PC Engine game. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's Dracula X on PC Engine, which was 256 by 224. And you can see some of that artwork in there. And because they started with that, they just went with that resolution. And that resolution looks totally fine on a CRT, right? Nobody really would notice that much. So they just went with it. And then when it comes to Saturn, it's like, oh, now we can't do that. And so you either do Capcom style where they just squish the whole image, right? So you have a narrow pillar boxed image. Like in Mega Man, they would actually have there's like artwork on the left and right. Right?
Little cool pictures and stuff, yeah,
because they couldn't actually stretch it to full screen because you're dealing with so few pixels. But Konami tried to do that, and if you actually like, they basically baked it into the artwork. They pre-scaled everything so that it was like every 4 pixels or something, they would double a pixel until it fills the whole screen. So it creates these uneven patterns in all of it. And people say like if you view it on a CRT and composite video, you can't see it, but
you could see it.
I don't agree.
Yeah.
You can see it on everything.
Well, you know,
I saw it back in the day. You can definitely feel that there's something wrong with the way it's scaled.
Especially when you're going upstairs, whenever it's scrolling, you can just kind of see the shimmer or how to describe it, but you just know that it's there. And again, most people, I think in the West at least, experienced the game on the PlayStation, so that's what we're familiar with. Then you play the Saturn version, and it's very obvious that
My thought on that was that they should have, this would have been more difficult, but like if they just squished everything a little bit and allowed it to be sort of tall and skinny, but then expand the viewport, right, where they show more of the tile work on the left and right of the image. And that creates a lot of QA work and figuring out where that breaks and where it doesn't. But it would have been cool if they just showed more of the background and filled out the 320 by 240 image. And then you would have a circular moon because, it was
the oval moon. Oval moon's fine. It's good enough. but it's funny though that you talk about that, and it's like I think it's just really a symptom of where the Saturn was in that era. Because I mean, even looking through the text files, they're like, "Yeah, sorry, we kind of rushed this," or "This is the B team. This isn't our best work, so we're sorry." And it's kind of a sadness, really. But I mean, it's really this is a symptom is where the Saturn was. It's like they were it was the B team. They had to really rush this out in a way, so they didn't really have time to, we can't recreate this. We can't redraw the sprites. We'd have to get the whole team. It's like, we got to do what we got to do. And it's really cool because if you think about it, it's like what we would probably do where it's like, we got to get something done. Well, we got to do it fast. So let's try to work around what we have. We'll stretch these out to make sure it's hidden and make it look good enough. But then, somebody like us that looks at it will know that there's an issue with it.
And by that time, PlayStation was really kicking ass in Japan, and I think that they needed to get it out to remain competitive,
And it wasn't, Symphony of the Night wasn't going to be a Western release, right? On Saturn.
No.
So they just didn't have the reason to pour that time in, because you know what? Konami did pour a lot of effort into Saturn games early on. Their first years of Saturn are awesome. And they actually have an advantage over PlayStation in many of those games, like the Parodius Deluxe Pack, which was a launch title on PlayStation. Saturn came out a bit later, but it's significantly better in terms of visual quality. It's closer to the arcade. It has none of the slowdown issues. It's a really great conversion of that game.
Contra Legacy of War was a little bit of a misstep, though.
Well, I would say that was a Western developed game.
Oh, that's okay.
Right?
It's
their Japanese stuff was good.
Yeah, sure, okay. I actually didn't realize that. I didn't know that was Western developed.
Oh yeah,
that's that vibe. And honestly, it has that vibe to it as well. I
think it was actually Appaloosa.
Appaloosa. Okay, no, you are right. You are correct. I saw that on the E3 video.
It is. Yep. Yeah. So that and C, the Contra Adventure.
Well, there you go.
Which came out on PlayStation. That was also Appaloosa.
Yeah.
All right.
I think I can't remember, one of those is 60 frames per second. It might be the second one, but which I will give them credit for, because it's cool that they got it running at a smooth frame rate.
It's funny. Maybe it might just be me, but I always seem like if you play like a Western developed game versus a Japanese developed game, you could really feel where their approach was depending on the company that released it. I don't know, maybe it might be like a vibe thing for me. It's it feels completely different, like what stuff Genmore and some of the Western developed games were aiming for versus Japanese games, even 3D. It's all otherworldly, It's
like a utilitarian approach versus a craftsmanship approach. You know what I mean?
Kind of, yeah.
The Western developers were like, let's just get this working, right? And then we, add stuff later. But I
wouldn't say they're all like that.
There are exceptions. I mean, look at Lobotomy. I mean, those guys. That's what I mean. Those guys cared. They really did. And there were other teams. EA made some really good stuff. Like Soviet Strike is a great game. It's very, very high production value. You could tell they cared.
Road Rash is good.
Road Rash is good. Command and Conquer. It's got a lot of really good Western developed games on the Saturn for sure. But for the most part, is what we're saying. Yeah, definitely. There's
Mr. Bones. That was Western developed, right?
Yeah, Mr. Bones is a grab bag. Mr. Bones is good and bad.
Oh, it's a bag of something, all right.
The production value is high, and there's some good stuff there. I always argue there's some good stuff in Mr. Bones, but yeah, for the most part, it's a frustratingly difficult game, and it doesn't know what it wants to be.
Yeah, okay. That was indeed a Western developed game. I wasn't 100% sure, just looking at it, I was like, that has to be, and it is.
Yeah, and I hope I didn't come off the wrong way. I wasn't trying to insult it. It just seemed like there was a different vibe coming from where they wanted to go gameplay development wise and gameplay wise. And it's not necessarily bad per se, because there's a lot of Western Saturn games were great.
Well,
it's just
my theory on this is that if you look at what was coming out of the West during the 16-bit era and everything, you had some superstars, especially in the UK, like Rare.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I think a lot of the best Western developers during that era, they weren't making console games. They were making PC games. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah.
And so we did start to get PC stuff on Saturn and PlayStation during this era, but it was always compromised because, PC has its own strengths in different areas.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the best Western games, they were on the PC. They were making first-person shooters or RTS games and stuff like that.
You can only do so much with Command and Conquer with a Saturn controller, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's good with a mouse, though, right? So
I don't think it has support for it, does it?
No, PlayStation though does.
Oh yeah,
you can still play. You can still do I think Warcraft 2 has mouse support as well. But yeah, on Saturn, the whole mouse situation, there's a bunch of games on there where it feels like this should have had mouse support, but then you start to dig into why it doesn't, and you're like, oh god, it was a mess back then. These guys never stood a chance.
I mean, Myst has mouse support. It was like a launch title in Japan and a very early release in the US, and it has mouse support. And then there are other games that you would expect them to have mouse support, and they don't. Or there's games like Corpse Killer where you expect it to have light gun support, and it doesn't. And it doesn't. You're just like, are you kidding me?
I think that is a symptom of Sega's development resources at the time in terms of what they made available to different teams and the chaos that must have been there. where like clearly not every developer had access to everything they probably should have for their games.
Yeah.
And it was very hit or miss on that front. So I think Myst was a Japanese developed port by Sunsoft, maybe?
Yep, it was.
So like I feel like the Japanese developers had a better access to this stuff. Whereas in the US, it felt like they were just like, you guys, you figure it out. Do what you can.
Right.
It's like, oh, we're 2 months to release. Oh, here's a mouse, and here's a mouse here. Have fun, guys. Good luck. And it's like, we're like a month from release. We're not doing
We're
that.
not doing that. Yeah.
But yeah, because we've actually talked to people like developers, and that was actually you're on the money. Where it's like, yeah, they just didn't get the items. It's like they had to wait, and then it's like they get it. It's like, well, we're about to go gold right now, so we're not going to redo the entire game over a peripheral. So here you go. Here's control support and use the password system. You're good to go. Bye. Here's the game.
Oh yeah,
freaking password systems, man.
Gex. They took it out. They took the proper save games out of Gex, and I love.
Although in retrospect, as somebody that's thinking about doing an episode on Gex soon, I was like, wait a minute, passwords are good in this case because I can skip to any level easily.
Okay, this is true, but wait a second. There's the hub world, so if you do have a save, you can always go back to the hub world and go to. No,
I know, but like. If you're covering 4 versions of a game, having to play all the way through every level on a game that's difficult like Gex, you know, it's like I will probably play all the way through 3DO and capture that, and then maybe skip around on the other versions to capture footage from the different levels for comparison's sake. Yeah, passwords can be convenient sometimes, but back in the day, that was annoying that they took that out, right?
Mm-hmm. Plus, you know, you collect the VHS tapes and everything. It's like a part of the whole charm.
It fits in.
Fits the theme.
And you have that like sort of VHS selector deck that you choose with like the play and stop buttons.
Exactly.
That kind of aesthetic in the save screen.
Yeah.
And with the password, it just shows like the spine of a VHS tape with like written text, I think it is.
Yeah.
And you just copy
I can't
that.
wait for that remaster, and all the kids will be like, what is this thing? What is this thing on the side of it for Gex?
Well, I would argue that if anybody's actually buying Gex, they would already know that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
True.
No,
True.
I don't think it's going to be selling to the
kids.
Not the kids. No.
The Fortnite kids, they're going to be like, nope.
Yeah.
Unless they get memed into doing it, in which case, you know, anything's possible.
This is true.
I can't wait. We're going to get was it the kids react to of Gex? And it's like, what is this thing on the side of it? It's like a cool mechanic thing. It's just funny.
Mario and Sonic can just get constantly reinvented, and so even kids these days are into it. But with something like Gex, it pretty much is frozen in time.
It's so weird, though, that I think it could get a certain group of younger people where they're just like, this is weird as heck.
Like, dude. They like and it ironically.
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be a lot of people like that are Scott the Woz fans that are going to buy it, hands down.
Yeah,
that's a whole meme with him.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's true.
So
anything's possible.
That's the thing, though. I feel like if you look at the internet reaction to Gex, I'm just going to say it. Most people are Gex posers. They didn't play Gex. They've never played Gex.
They're not true Gen Gexer.
No, they like it because of Scott the Woz or other, you know, meme related things.
Right.
But how many people actually played Gex? I was there. I played Gex back in the day.
So what did you think of Enter the Gecko, like the 3D outing versus...
At the time, I was blown away because I played it first on PC because I got it along with a 3DFX Voodoo card.
Ooh.
Oh,
and I played it on
Voodoo.
that. And it looked really awesome. And I was like, wow, this is, 3D platforms, which I loved from like Mario 64 and the like. This looks amazing. This is really cool.
It feels like it was one of the first real collectathons where it was just like you're going around collecting stuff, you know.
But in retrospect, I think it has some fun points, but the game, it turns out, is very twitchy in terms of movement. Like it doesn't feel good to control, and it's kind of hard to play. I don't love it. I think the original Gex is much better. It's
much more classic. Yeah,
as a game.
I agree.
What's also interesting about that, though, is that it's one of those few games where it's a 3D platformer. You'd expect the N64 version to wallop the PlayStation, but it turns out the PlayStation version is a lot better.
It is. It
actually runs really smoothly. It plays okay. On N64, it's like super chuggy and sloppy, and it does not feel good at all on there, and which surprised me. But I guess Crystal Dynamics had a lot more experience making PlayStation games, so I'm sure that factored into it at that point, but
I only recently discovered that actually because I played the PlayStation game growing up and recently tried the N64 game like on my EverDrive, and I was just like, wow, this is not what I remember. So I fired up the PlayStation one. I was like, okay, yeah, it's not what I remember.
Yeah, and the PC is kind of like even a step above that, I would say. So I played it PC first, and then I picked it up on PlayStation on the cheap.
Right.
And then years later, I found an N64 cartridge, and I was like, oh yeah, I bet it's really good on here. It was not good on there, as you know.
You're just going from worst to worst because you're going from the 480p goodness to 240p to Vaseline smeared.
It just kept getting worse.
It's like, please, let's go back to the PC. Forget all these other versions. I'm done.
Exactly.
But
and there was a lot of games back then. So another one that's always interesting to me was like how Psygnosis had a bunch of games show up on Saturn.
Right.
But they didn't all come out in the West. Like obviously Wipeout, I think did. Wipeout 2097, those, or XL, those both hit Saturn. You had Destruction Derby on there, Crazy Yvonne. There was Discworld on there, and maybe some others.
So Psygnosis was a UK company, right? But didn't Sony buy them?
Correct.
And they put out SN Systems stuff like the development kits that were like much cheaper. Much like the PsyQ. They were like a pittance compared to like what you would pay for an actual Sega development kit, and you could do some decent stuff on them. But I'm just thinking like maybe it had something to do with that. Like maybe there was some kind of backdoor deal where they're like, okay, well, you're in the UK and you already were doing stuff for This is all speculation. I don't know, but you're absolutely right. There's a bunch of games that just didn't come over here that were Psygnosis games, like Destruction Derby.
Destruction I like when they pronounce that. I cannot pronounce it any other way now.
I loved that game, and I would have loved it on the Saturn over here, but we just didn't get it.
I missed two more. There was 3D Lemmings and Assault Rigs.
Oh, Assault Rigs. Dang. Yeah, I always forget that one.
Psygnosis put out a lot of stuff on the Saturn. It's just that most of it didn't come to the West. I would say that those conversions were generally not great. Like they all run a lot worse than PlayStation.
Right.
But they were obviously developed for PlayStation first and foremost and sort of converted, right?
Right.
And that's, you know how that goes.
Well, definitely.
Yeah, a little bit messy. It makes you wonder if it's either the US was like, we don't really want that B tier stuff, or just like we got to service the UK first and then maybe the US afterwards. And it's so like, the US never happened.
Well, with that leaked Sega document that you guys went over recently, and I read through the whole darn thing.
Right.
I believe there was some mention about quality in relation to one of those games. Maybe it was Destruction Derby. I can't remember which one it was, but there was one in there where in like the quality section, I feel like there was a note on there about the quality would make it look weak compared to PlayStation or something.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that they weren't fools. They noticed this stuff.
Right.
I mean, well, I say they weren't fools, but obviously there was some foolery, some tomfoolery in there.
Well, I mean, you made a great point. Anytime you had a game that started on PlayStation and it had to get ported back over to Saturn, it wasn't an ideal circumstance. You know, that's what you would get in like official Sega Saturn magazine. You would always get this talk about like how decent does it do it at representing the original. Oh, well, it's not quite there, but it's still really good. Like Wipeout, not quite there, but we love it. It's great. We get it on Saturn. That's the kind of tone of it. And Resident Evil, we have to wait a year and it's not going to be as good, but we get Resident Evil on Saturn. But when you had a game that was just like agnostic of that, you know, it started out on another platform and they get two teams and okay, you're going to port it to the Saturn, you're going to port it to the PlayStation, like NBA Jam Tournament Edition.
Yep.
The Saturn is able to contend, you know.
It's a 2D game.
And it's a 2D game, okay.
I think that point about Grandia earlier it applies to the PlayStation as well, where, you know, they use those specific functions of the VDP2 and design.
Good point.
When designing Grandia, right? Well, on PlayStation, they would design games a specific way for PlayStation in terms of how much geometry they used, you know, the way they were displaying things, certain techniques, like, oh yeah, whereas on Saturn, it's like, all right, if you want to do like, I don't know, some kind of special effect, right? You want to approach it differently to play to the strengths of the hardware.
Yeah.
And on PlayStation, you would approach it in a different way. And they're so different that was required. So when you're porting a game from one platform to the other, you're left with a problem then. It's like, well, if you want it to be an accurate port, you've got to duplicate that original art for like a special effect, right?
Yeah.
Well, now it's going to be dithered transparency on Saturn. or there's going to be something else wrong with it because that's how it works on PlayStation. Whereas if they played to the Saturn's strengths, they would essentially they would have to come up with a completely different artistic representation of the same idea to make it work. And then it's no longer true to the source material. So do you change it at that point? Like, it opens up all those questions because they really don't do the same things. And that's kind of the issue there. So anytime you got a port that just tried to convert the game as it was, you're going to end up with issues on one or the other, depending on where it started. And that's exactly the case.
I wonder how many other examples like that exist, where it's like Saturn to PlayStation. Tell me, do you know the story with, Dead or Alive? Did that start on Saturn or PlayStation? Because the Saturn version is killer.
I thought that was that was a Model 2 game first. Right. Like there was an arcade game.
Yeah, I actually do know an example. I'm pretty sure it wasn't Tomb Raider originally Saturn original, and then it moved over to everything else, I think.
Well, that's kind of a bad example in the sense that the Saturn version is really janky comparatively.
Really? I think the Saturn version is pretty good.
I thought he was talking Tomb Raider.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not talking Tomb Raider. I was talking Dead or Alive.
You were talking Dead or Alive, but Pat...
Yeah, I was just using an example because I think that was...
He mentioned Tomb Raider.
Saturn, I think. Yeah, sorry about that. I mean to swap over. I was just trying to figure out an example of that.
Yeah, Tomb Raider does perform and look a lot more stable, and just it looks better on PlayStation. And I mean, they were doing that simultaneously. I think they were.
Yeah, I think it was simultaneous.
They were definitely developing that one simultaneous. It did start development on Saturn first.
It's a weird technicality, really. Yeah,
but it was almost simultaneous. It was pretty much simultaneous.
As far as DOA though, is a really interesting one because that's one of those rare examples where it looks like the developer basically went back and they're like, all right, we're going to port this game to these consoles. We can't do the arcade game on here because it's a Model 2 game, right? So we have to come up with a way to bring this to these other machines. They actually did the legwork of playing to the strengths of each system. Saturn does use the VDP2 floor kind of design with the 3D characters on there. I mean, that's the whole reason Virtua Fighter 2 and all that work as fast as they do, is because they're like borderline, it's like a 2D game, but instead of sprites for the characters, they actually do the 3D. But because they only have to do those characters, it becomes a lot more feasible to actually do it at a good speed. On PlayStation, it's more as you'd expect, where the floor is like a polygon surface.
Right.
Both games still use 2D backgrounds, but on Saturn, because again, they're using the VDP2 setup, you can actually get like more parallax effects in the background. You know, like in the one stage, you've actually got like it's like this like sort of industrial kind of warehousey stuff around it, and then there's like these orange mountains in the background that scroll independently from the foreground. That's pretty cool to see. But the Saturn version is missing, I think, some of the character shading. If you remember on PlayStation, they use that really like subtle shading to give them sort of the rounded edges, like and there's more lighting on the characters in a way, so the characters kind of look better, whereas in Saturn they're very flat, but they still look great. It's just different. So I would say they both look really good in their own right, and they each take advantage of what the hardware can do.
No, I think
also
that's fascinating.
PlayStation, because it's a polygon floor, you get the texture warping.
True.
Whereas on it's not too bad, but on Saturn, because it's a VDP2 layer, it's just perfect. There's none of that.
Yeah, it seems between the way that you're describing it, because I've not played the Saturn version of it. I played PlayStation a little bit, but it doesn't seem like there's a really bad version of it. It just seems it's different. Maybe
right.
Yeah, it's which is interesting. I like games that are like that, where it's like it's not bad, but you know, like it's kind of like with the Resident Evil, where it's like you can either one, there are differences, but it's not like one's awful compared to the other one, I suppose.
Exactly.
But again, like talented Japanese developer taking their time.
Exactly. It's all about the time,
crafting
big
it.
T word. It's like, need the time to do these things.
It's true.
Exactly. Yeah, and that, you know, so that's actually cool to see. I'm happy that those guys actually put the work in on making the Saturn version of that. But there's not, unfortunately, I don't think there's too many games like that where you have a developer creating two separate versions of a game for both systems that kind of play to the strengths. There's got to be others though,
Who did
right?
Power Slave for PS1?
Oh, that was the same. That was the same team. That
That was
Lobotomy.
Lobotomy. Okay, so but they did the Saturn version first, right?
Yeah, I would say that maybe qualifies, but
They ended up pretty good on PlayStation, all things considered.
yeah, they made some interesting changes to it, but it's pretty good on both, I would say. The PlayStation version runs at a higher frame rate, but it's missing some of the levels are scaled back in weird ways. So,
And you mentioned lighting not working great on Saturn, and yet that game is kind of like an exception to the rule, right?
well, they do some, but the way they do lighting, you notice it has this really like harsh, bizarre look to it. It's not the traditional kind of like lighting up the vertices or of that era. It looks like it's something else entirely. Almost like they're like layering some kind of art, and I can't even remember how that worked, but it was really, really weird. The lighting in that game, it looked unlike anything else, and it doesn't have the. It's not the typical stuff you see. It feels. I always described it as the lighting in Power Slave feels like if you were trying to simulate lighting in a 2D sprite game.
Huh.
You know what I mean? Where it's like you would draw the light popping off in the artwork, and that's what it feels like to me. It doesn't feel like you're just using like programming to like light up polygons. It's like, no, we're gonna draw the light in a cool way. Like it's not exactly that, but that's what I always felt when seeing it in action.
I think that's probably a good indication of great people that know how lighting works, and a great person on the lighting team for programming, where it's like it looks like it's natural almost, or it's like supposed to be there, you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's one of those things though that makes Saturn games so unique. Like when it comes to the 2D games, it's harder to tell without knowing the library intimately. You know, it's hard to tell a really good 2D game on the Saturn versus a 2D game on the PlayStation. Like if you had Metal Slug playing or something like that, you know, they both look great. But when it comes to like the 3D stuff, it's just very obvious, you know. What
I actually do have some 2D examples though that are fun for you. So one of the ones, I don't know if you guys have actually bothered to check it out, but I think Darius Gaiden is one of the best games on Saturn.
It's phenomenal.
Oh yeah,
you know, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
But did you know it got a PlayStation port?
It did. Yes.
Only in Japan.
Only in Japan, yeah.
I picked that up some years ago out of curiosity. It's horrendous.
Is it really bad?
Well, good thing they didn't listen to you then.
Basically, it runs at like 45 to 50 frames per second with screen tearing most of the time.
Wow.
It's so bad that I was shocked that it got released in that state.
Oh wow.
And it seems whoever did the conversion work, they did a bad job. So that game is terrible on PlayStation compared to Saturn. So don't be fooled by the awesome cover art. It's not a good version. And that's actually one of the rare cases where the PlayStation version I would say is actually bad compared to what you get on Saturn, and I don't recommend it, but it was cool to see it. Another one that always stuck out to me, and this one's a little bit weird, was Kaite Daisenso, or In the Hunt.
Yeah.
People always say, oh, the PlayStation version is the one to get on that game. And there's some truth to that, but it's not so clear cut.
There's less slowdown though, right?
That's what everybody says. But here's the thing.
That's what everyone says.
The Saturn version has slowdown, but it works in the more old school method where the game tries to be 60 frames per second.
Right.
And it's often there, but anytime it does slow down, it literally cuts the frame rate in half and the whole game runs slow. Right. So it does, you feel it, but that's how slowdown worked in the day, right? That's why it's called slowdown. That's, you know, Gradius 3 on the Super NES. That's what was happening. It was cutting it in half and running slow.
And you used it to your advantage in a lot of places.
Right. In the Hunt on Saturn runs better than something like Gradius 3. It's not that slow, but it does get slow at points. On PlayStation, however, they just skip frames. So the game speed stays correct. It doesn't actually run slow. But if you actually look at the scrolling, it's basically never smooth. It's always kind of unstable, and it looks kind of jittery.
That's
because the
cheating.
game doesn't actually hold 60 frames per second at all on the PlayStation. It's just because they skip frames, the game speed isn't affected. So people think it run. They're right. It does run with less slowdown, but it never looks as smooth as the Saturn version can. So it's kind of like
affect speedrunners and people that actually do score attacks, if that would affect that. For them.
They would be different versions. You couldn't combine you'd have to have people playing on the different platforms. You couldn't compare the two, right? Because of the slowdown. So it's kind of a pick your poison. Do you want the game to run at full speed all the time but look choppy, or do you want fluidity in more cases, but then have some slowdown. I guess the problem on Saturn is that there's a couple stages where the slowdown gets real bad. Like that one, that vertical stage where you have that huge like rock monster crawling up the stage.
So much on screen. There's so much.
That pretty much just runs in slow motion, like the whole stage on Saturn, and that actually is pretty bad. But most of the game is
Metal Slug 2.
Yeah, it's like that.
Yeah.
But I will say the one advantage PlayStation has is that you can use the arcade soundtrack, which I think is much better.
Yeah.
Where Saturn only has the arranged soundtrack, which honestly is pretty bad.
Right.
It's one of those cases where it's kind of like not super clear.
Now, was that IREM, or was that the IREM guys that became Nazca?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So I'm curious, is there any advantage to getting the Japanese version over I have the long box, like the US long box version of it? Was there any, did they work on it more, or is it basically the same game?
No, and in fact, the Japanese version is notable because I can't remember, there's a certain model of Saturn that it doesn't run on.
Yeah, I remember we covered that before. Kay was talking.
I think
about
it's
that.
Model 2s possibly, because they use some kind of, it's something to do with the FMV at the beginning where it performs some sort of call that the later Saturn hardware, I think it's later, can't handle. Something goes wrong there, and it just crashes on the video, and you can't actually play the game. And this actually isn't the only time that happened. Sega ages like Outrun, and I think it's just Outrun. The standalone release of Outrun on Saturn, the first print run doesn't work on Model 2 Saturns at all. It just crashes on the loading screen. And it's the same kind of thing where there's some subtle difference in the hardware that you wouldn't expect that just causes these early games to just completely die.
I know in the Hunt, there's some kind of boot issue. So on a quote unquote Model 2 Saturn, I don't know what the exact revision is, but it's basically a later revision Saturn with the round buttons. It will boot, but you have to do some tricky stuff. Like you have to put a controller in the second player port or something like that, and you can't fire it up with a controller inserted into the first.
Okay, so maybe there is a workaround then. I'm not sure if it's different from the US version or not. But
I distinctly remember that with my US long box copy, I can't just get it to boot straight up. Yeah.
Okay, well that's good to know that there's a way to actually boot it. That's weird though, right? Where it just
It is weird.
There's a lot of I think there's another shmup. I forget what one that's.
Well, Croc has the invisible head thing going on with that.
Oh, that's creepy.
You have to start it from the BIOS or something.
Yeah, but there's another shmup I think that has an issue where if you have a mod chip, it will just infinite boot or just a glitch out on you that you actually can't run it with. It's like a weird thing. I remember Kay brought it up on the podcast once. There's some with that, but it's just weird how like these little nuances with the Saturn hardware revisions would cause that, because I don't think there's a lot with revisions that do that really in any other consoles, to my knowledge.
I think that did happen with the later so the very last PlayStation 2. I think it's the 9000 series, like the really late Slim. I think the backwards compatibility function was moved to entirely software driven on that system.
Yeah.
And I think the PS1 compatibility is like a lot worse on that model of PlayStation 2. The very last model of the Slim. It's like the cheapest version they made. And I don't remember the exact details, but I feel like a lot of PS1 games are broken on that or have issues that don't exist.
The first Slim was pretty cool. Like that one was still pretty.
Most of the Slims are cool. It's literally just like it's the ones that would have been made in like the late 2000s. I think. Yeah. Most people probably didn't have that, so.
Yeah, it's probably like the budget ones, like $99 ones for sale at Best Buy or whatever.
Now the Majesco, the Genesis 3, that they did the Genesis 3, doesn't that thing have some like compatibility issues with earlier games, or is it pretty much?
It doesn't work with Virtua Racing for sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I can't remember if it has any other issues. I mean, there are Mega Drive games, like early Japanese games don't work on Mega Drives that have the TMSS chip or whatever.
Oh, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So like Thunderblade is one of those.
I was gonna say there's one issue that Bob at Retro RGB found where they thought for a while that the Genesis 3 didn't have RGB, but it's because the cable wasn't able to fit in all the way, and then they got shorted it down. It worked. It's kind of weird like that.
Oh wow!
I didn't realize. That's pretty amazing. That's
like
nuts.
a physical hardware thing.
Yeah. That's it.
That's actually a good fun fact. I didn't even know that. I didn't catch that one. Fact. So cheers, Bob. But yeah, so how about we talk about working with Richard?
Oh yeah,
doing DF. Well, I have to admit, like, I'm a big fan of Richard. I'm a big fan of like his work on OSSM, my favorite gaming magazine. I used to import it back in the day.
Wait, really? You actually imported it? That's amazing.
Yeah, he's insane.
It was. I mean, I didn't have to do anything hard. It just, they happened to carry it at Barnes and Noble.
Oh, right. I remember that.
It was like $10 an issue. It wasn't cheap, but it was worth it. And it was like the only way I could get Saturn news as a lonely Saturn fan in like 97, was from that. Yeah. And so Sam Hickman, Richard Ledbetter, Lead Nutter, like that's kind of how I got my Saturn news and learned about like chipping your Saturn and importing Japanese games and stuff like that. It was so, kind of a bit of an idol. And then DF Retro.
Did you get the issue with the Panzer Dragoon, I guess the Panzer Dragoon RPG saga, disc 1, where you managed that deal? That is just insane. We're like, we're going to include the first disc in the magazine on the cover.
That was brilliant. I mean, I would argue that it really helped sell that game better than it would have without. But I have literally every single issue, and I have OSM, like the every issue of OSM before it. But I don't have that disc. Funny enough, I don't have that first disc because I got that one second hand from someone else.
Is that some money now for that disc? Is that an expensive?
I don't think so.
It's literally just the first disc. Like it's just. Yeah, it's just
it's literally disc 1 of the game included in the magazine, and it's designed. Disc 1 is fairly short compared to the rest.
Yeah,
because of all the FMV, but it's a great way to play disc 1. Save your game, and then if you buy the full game, you just continue from there.
So when you responded to Richard's ad, I guess for an employee, like you were already familiar with him from that, or?
I mean, I was familiar with DF work, and I was familiar with his prior work. I didn't read that back in the day, but I had since because of DF, I read into that stuff and looked into some of the old Mean Machines issues, Mean Machine Sega, this Saturn magazine and all that, and it was deep respect for the guy that's been at it since like 1990.
And he's still at it with you guys.
Still
That's
holding
great.
it down.
Keeping that dream alive.
And you came along and started up DF Retro, right? It was Digital Foundry, and then you started DF Retro, which really goes back into all this, all on a whim and everything. And tell us a little bit about that journey, like from the beginning of you pitching it and starting that out to like what it's become and how that's been for you.
I mean, that literally just came out of like, I got a copy of Quake on Saturn.
Nice.
And was like, oh yes, finally. And I remember playing it and thinking, this is so cool. I just want to cover this. Mm-hmm. So I made like a 5-minute video on the weekend just for that, because I liked Quake, and we just put it up on the channel. And that was literally basically it. And that kind of started this whole retro push, because I wanted to do it for a while, but nobody else was on board. Like, oh, retro stuff doesn't do well. Right. It doesn't. But it did in the end. But I guess technically the first retro video I ever did came out after that, but it was for Shenmue, the original Shenmue video I did. I did that earlier that year in anticipation of Shenmue 3 being announced at E3, or being shown at E3, I think it was. Because it had been announced, but we were expecting to see more on it. So I was like, I'll do a retrospective on it. But I didn't actually finish the retrospective. It just sat on my hard drive for a couple months.
I
went back to it after I did the Quake video and said, well, I should finish this and release it. And it just kind of started from there.
And have you, over time, have you gone even deeper and deeper in how you're able to like tear these games down and look at them?
Yeah, as much as like, it depends on, so there's different layers and types of video. Depending for some videos I would focus on one game and try to go as deep as I can, and that usually happened when I would discover something cool about them, or some sort of like utility or method for like ripping the data, or like just that kind of stuff would push me to want to do it. But then for some videos I just like to cover a lot of games in there. And like the PlayStation launch video, there's a lot of fun little technical tidbits, but we cover every launch game, and that includes comparisons with other versions. So you can't go like super deep onto every title, right? Because it's just you're covering too much. So it just kind of varies depending on the mood I'm in, what type of video I want to make. And sometimes I just like a video just kind of going through a bunch of titles and kind of laying out the details about it, talking about what made them interesting, and just sharing that with everybody in a way that is at least moderately coherent. Because I myself like to watch that. I make the types of videos I like to watch. Like, I love when somebody's like, all right, on this episode of the podcast, we're going to look at like every single digital pinball game, you know, like you guys did once on the podcast.
Yeah.
You just go through it.
Watching that, by the way, I appreciate that. Or listening.
I love that stuff, right? I think that's really, really fun when you just like, yeah, we're just going to go through all of them, because, you know, a lot of YouTube videos will just say like, here's the best, here's the top Mario games, or here's all the big, you know, the big popular stuff. And when you do like a topic like that, you end up covering a lot of stuff that is maybe lesser known, not talked about so much.
Right.
And it's fun to see all of that laid out in a way like, here's all the data.
Yeah.
And something I like to do along those same lines is like put that historical context in there. It's hard to do it, but I try to build like an atmosphere in the video of like, this is what it felt like at the time.
Yes.
Put people in that headspace of like, this is kind of like the thinking, because what we know today about this stuff and everything about it is very different from what you knew back then.
Yeah.
Like, the visibility was different and the hype was different, and the conclusions people have come to over the years about Saturn or any other platform, none of that stuff had happened yet. Right. Like, when the Saturn was faltering in the late 90s there, it was still a system that was on the market, and it was faltering. And the thoughts and thinking around it was different if you were there than if you look at it 20 years later. And since I was there for all of that, it's just kind of like, I try to put that into the video and like help people understand like why people thought a certain way about things at the time, and really bring that excitement back in a way.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I love that you did, and you were one of the few people doing it in those like video essays or like kind of mini documentaries on, and then of course technical deep dives into the games. And folks that have come after you, like Nick Panda, you know, he does these documentaries, and he also really does work hard to put in a lot of context. And it's like you said, it can't be understated how important the context is, because it really does. It's so much more meaningful than any of these like people like basically reading off Sega Retro or reading off Wikipedia. It's not a gatekeeping thing either, because I know a lot of us say, oh, I was there, you know, and then folks get mad but it's like, you're really helping younger generations and even current generations that may have just completely forgotten, because we just take everything for granted, you know, that it's like things were really different that back then. You couldn't understate how important 3D was, and how much consumers just had blinders onto 2D, how much the press just would tank a game review if it was a 2D game just because it was not in vogue, you know?
Right.
Or FMV, as FMV started to age and then kind of go out of vogue, it was like, it could be the pinnacle of FMV.
It flipped so fast.
They could have reached the point where everything clicked, and it was like the perfect example of what an FMV game could have been.
Maximum Surge almost got there.
Yeah.
That would have been the best thing that those guys had ever done at Digital Pictures, because I actually have that demo on a disc, and I remember playing it on the PC, like, wow, this is actually pretty impressive for an FMV game, and then it got canceled.
I think stuff like Lunacy is really great, how they were able to like load everything, you know, so it almost feels like there's no loading. You're just constantly moving, and it's so fluid. And then there's FMV cutscenes, but they're able to tie it in so well. And then by the time it released, it was like, who cares? It's an FMV game, you know?
You know, it's kind of funny. I've always been a fan of those games. Like, one of my first games I've ever played in my life was this game called Mega Race on the PC.
I have it, yep.
Yeah,
came with my Packard Bell.
Oh, same here. That was my first.
Yeah,
PC.
nice.
Yeah,
and the 3D dinosaur. Did you play that one?
3D dinosaur adventure, 3D body adventure.
I didn't do the body one. I'm a body phobic with that, but I did those two, and it's funny because I grew up with all those games, and it's like I love the FMV games. Like we were just covering the Taito LD games, and I was so hyped.
Oh yeah.
Like, we got Time Gal. We got all these other ones. Ninja Hayate. We got a spaceship battleship Yamato, and all.
That's why you need to get a 3DO, so you can get the 3DO conversion of Pyramid Intruder. It's actually Pyramid Patrol on Mega LD, but they did a 3DO version as well from Taito.
A little bit cheaper.
It's a little bit cheaper.
A little bit cheaper.
A couple thousand cheaper, but I just love these games, and like I love I'm glad that it's coming back, and like you said, there's stuff in vogue. It's like I'm I wonder if like stuff that's like not that popular today would become like that now, I guess, or that in the future where it's like, oh, these games suck now, but it's like, oh, these are like these cool little nuggets of games that never really took off or whatever.
Did you ever play Mega Race 2?
I actually never did play that one.
That one is mind blowing in terms of what they do with video.
Really?
Because they're able to so they have enough frames where they can vary the speed very realistically. It has branching paths everywhere. And then they do this wild thing where let's say, the thing about an FMV racing game is you're always going forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mega Race 2 was like, well, we're using polygon cars with FMV backgrounds. But what if we allow the player to drive backwards?
Oh.
How do you solve that in an FMV game? Well, the way they do it is that if you stop your car, turn around, drive the other way, they have individual pre-rendered backgrounds, not movie files, but pre-rendered backgrounds that show the tracks from the different perspectives. And you can turn your car around that way. So it basically stops moving forward and it cuts the different angles of you driving the wrong way until you start driving forward again. And then they cut back to that. And they actually thought of ways to make it so you could truly drive like a 3D racing game, like a polygon racing game, but using FMV backgrounds, and it actually freaking works.
I want to play that now. I need to.
That's like the creative problem solving that you had when developers came up against like hard stop restrictions with the hardware or whatever. They're just like, well, how do we do this? How can we get creative? Nowadays it's like everything is essentially a powerful PC, or actually,
or not a powerful PC.
Yeah, consoles are just basically like really basic PCs. Developers are a lot less creative. Also, they have a lot of times they have enough headroom with processing power and stuff like that. They don't really need to make everything super efficient when it comes to the code and everything like that.
Or compressing it and stuff. I mean, it'd be nice not to have a 200 gigabyte download because they don't want to compress files. It'd be get back to that, please.
Exactly.
Yeah, man, that's stuff.
A great example of an FMV game would be Wing Commander 3 Heart of the Tiger, was it? And that was on 3DO.
And 4.
Yeah, 4 was great. You had Mark Hamill. You had really high production value on those. Was on the 3DO and then the PlayStation. Yeah. Why didn't that come to Saturn? That's weird. I know, right? Well,
that feels like that would have been
that got canceled on it. That was considered.
It was considered. It was in those documents that it was considered and canceled.
It's so early for the Saturn that I'm surprised, though. It feels like it's still in that window where they would have released it, but I guess not. Because, the PlayStation version comes in a long box because, it's from that long box
Exactly.
era.
I just wonder,
That's early.
They really wanted to push Mike Ditka's football.
Ditka's football.
I guess they just thought that was better.
Oh man,
it's
just looking at my 3DO games over there. What a weird system.
It is a weird system.
I have two copies of Mega Race on 3DO.
Ooh,
because I got a Japanese version and an American version. Because just hearing Lance Boyle dubbed in Japanese is very entertaining.
I actually want to watch that now. That's probably really funny. I love that actor, dude.
Yeah, that guy, he's hilarious. He did a great job on that.
Yeah, 3DO has a handful.
Mega Race 4 got kind of canceled, though.
What was that, Pat?
What's that?
Kind of sad. Mega Race 4 got canceled with the Kickstarter.
They did make Mega Race 3, though.
Oh yeah, on the PS2. Yeah. Ooh,
it's weird.
But
he's
weird.
in it. He's in it, so it's worth buying it just to experience that. It's here in Europe. I don't know if it came out anywhere else though. I feel like it did not.
I'll probably just put it on my. I think I have it on my PS2 over the network things that I legally ripped and downloaded legally, of course.
Wait, it says there was Oh, okay. It came out in the U.S. only on PC.
Oh, okay.
So there's a PC version in the U.S., but then the PlayStation 2 version was only in Europe. So that's interesting.
I wonder if they have a Mega Race 1 on Steam. Oh, they have all three of them on Steam. So I'll
the Mega Race pack.
$5.91. Ooh, I know what I'm buying right now.
There you go. But yeah, 3DO you were mentioning.
Yeah, it's a weird. There's a good handful of games that I think are worth owning or at least playing on that console, but then there's a bunch of trash too. I would be lying if I said there wasn't a bunch of trash on the 3DO too. But yeah.
Yeah, it's but even some of the trash can be fun, like Demolition
definitely.
Man on 3DO is it's not good, but it's so interesting and weird.
Fun
and
with
cool.
other people. Some of that stuff is not as fun as you're just playing it by yourself. And that the pad is not great. I mean, it doesn't feel great.
I would say it feels okay enough. It's like,
Sure.
to me, it's like a slightly less good Genesis controller.
No, but it's so much stiffer though. Like it feels so much stiffer.
The D-pad is really stiff. It's hard to play Street Fighter on that.
That's kind of a crime. A stiff D-pad.
Yeah, but
know.
I've been there.
It's I don't hate it, but
No, I don't hate it
love
either.
It is an okay enough pad.
I mean, it feels good in the hands. Like the design is nice, but yeah, as
It
far
was
as
also
like,
the first one to ever do that
daisy chaining?
the headphone jack
or the headphone jack.
with the volume control on the controller, which is something we have these days, but at
Right.
the time that was wild.
Good
That was
point.
even possible.
Innovation.
And yeah, you mentioned the daisy chain. The daisy chaining is kind of cool because it basically means no multi-tap required.
But then you could just yank it out on your. I mean, that's the thing, you know.
Just be like, I was like, I'm beating you with Street Fighter. Oh no! Oh, you actually unplugged.
You
My
gotta
bad.
like lock it. You gotta put wrap duct tape around it or something like that. Okay, I'm gonna
That's real cheap.
I'm gonna try something fun with you, John. Let's do some word association. Okay, I say a word. You just tell me the first thing that comes to mind. Okay.
All right.
Philips CDI.
Oh man, Micro Machines with my friend Audie, where we were trying to play with the IR controller, and it was so bad because it kept like losing the input, and it was also a game you have to remember. Sorry, you have to choose between music or sound effects. You're not allowed to have both,
Right.
right? Which turned out to be a very common CDI thing that I think
It
is
is.
hilarious because
Yeah. Oh my God. That console has some weird idiosyncrasies, but yeah, I mean, like it wasn't really supposed to be a game console, right? It was like a multimedia.
It's like an
Right.
interactive education tool or something like that.
It just hit at a time where it was like, oh, we've got to pivot and really like push this thing as a game console, you know?
but it does have Thunder in Paradise.
Thunder in Paradise,
Which,
yeah.
Ooh, I
you know,
love that one.
once you get past that first level, it's not
No.
bad because it's got, you know, it's like a Time Crisis style shooter, Virtua Cop style shooter with FMV, which I guess would be more like, you know, Lethal Enforcers, right? But because it was FMV, you know, it would stop at a screen, you do the action, but then it would have like the full camera movement to the next scene with Hulk Hogan running around with you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it worked.
Yeah.
Pat, why don't you give him the next one?
Okay. I guess Kojima.
Kojima, probably Metal Gear Solid 2, actually.
Really?
Oh,
That's the
interesting
first one that
choice.
comes to mind because that's my favorite one in the series. It was the one that it impressed me the most at the time, and it really like I loved the subversion of the audience with the trailer stuff and the Raiden reveal because I actually was someone that, you know, I bought it day one. I didn't know that was coming. It completely took me by surprise, and I know people got mad about it, but for me, I was like, the idea that a piece of media that big could release and they could hide something that significant and actually like subvert the audience expectations. I found that so interesting and bold at the time. Like, wow, like I can't even believe that a company like Konami allowed somebody to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Only Kojima. They knew he sold the games. He sold the.
Like, it's crazy. Like, I feel like that would just never happen these days. Like, no marketing companies are like, no, we're not fooling the audience to think they're getting something that they're not. But it's
and
freaking
even
cool.
even up to Phantom Pain, they did that with the whole the Project Whale or whatever it's called.
yeah.
The Project
right.
Moby Dick. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that they let Kojima play
Moby
do that
Dick
for that
Studios or
long.
whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah. And there's like, is that guy CG or not?
it's so fun. You know, it's amazing. I just love all that, and I'm a big fan of Police Knots and stuff myself, and like
I like
Snatcher,
that,
stuff,
yeah.
all those games.
I love Snatcher. I played Police Knots much later, and that's also cool. Those are neat, but they're experiences, not so much as like the typical game. It's
an
like
adventure
it's
game.
like a graphic adventure
for
with
sure.
visual novel kind of aspect.
Definitely. But it very
Japanese style adventure game.
channeling that kind of like film because he's such a film buff, you know.
That's true. I did try playing Snatcher with the Justifier though.
Oh, how was that?
It's
How
not
was
the
that?
best
I've actually never
experience,
tried
but
it.
it's interesting. It doesn't feel that great, but it is funny having the Justifier, your trusty Justifier, sitting at your hip while you're playing. And as soon as the light gun section starts up, you like throw the controller aside and grab it, like let's go. But then the actual shooting action isn't really that great. So
Is it still the quadrants they have? You have to shoot into each quadrant, or is
I
it like
believe so. But you're not like selecting the quadrants. You're just like shooting it. You know what I mean?
I gotcha. So it's like a little bit less robust, where it's like you just shoot the quadrant and it's like, oh, you hit it. Okay, that's close enough.
I think so. It's been a little while, but I do have it, but I only have the main justifier. That second one, I think is the pink one. Yeah, I think it's the pink one. That's the rare one because you have to link them together with like what looks like a phone cable almost, like one of those little like phone connectors.
Right, like an RJ11 or something.
Yeah, you plug it
weird.
into you plug the one gun into the Mega Drive Genesis, and then you plug the other gun into that first gun. And because of that, and they only sold it like mail order, so they barely exist. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say Police Knots has mouse support, but then again, Japanese developer.
Yeah.
Okay, next one is let's go Atari Jaguar.
Oh, man.
What do you think about that?
Oh, the Jaguar. I think of JagFest, which I'm happy to go to because it's coming back this year.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with JagFest.
Yeah, Tom Tronek of the Junkyard always talks about it. I found it interesting. I'm curious, what is it like? Like, is it like I mean?
It's a small gathering of maybe like 30, 40 people that just freaking love the Jaguar and like weird Atari stuff. There's homebrew games there. There's like they've brought some wild stuff to the show, like unreleased arcade boards using like Jaguar hardware. They had the Panther dev kit and like manuals there. Somebody brought a Jaguar VR prototype there once. They always had the Jaguar kiosk, and there's crazy. It's the only place in the world where you can actually sit down and have a checkered flag tournament on the Atari Lynx with 8 Lynxes all connected together. So it's like an 8-way championship on the Lynx, and it's surprisingly fun. But the whole story with JagFest and its existence seems to stem from like an Atari warehouse near there that like burnt down back in the 90s, and all the kids in the area basically raided it and got like partially damaged Jaguars like out of the rubble, and so everybody had Jaguars because of this fire, and that just became like this little corner of Germany where like the Jaguar was popular because they all got them.
Oh my god!
So it's kind of hilarious. It's just like you're seeing a bunch of Jaguar equipment like half burnt, like half the box is on fire, the half is charred.
The guy that runs the show, like he still has his like fire singed Jaguar that he brings to the show, and it's in a little cabinet. It's funny to see it.
Wow,
that's crazy. But I'm really happy that as much as we joke around, it's really cool to have a scene like that because I mean, as a Saturn community, we have that same thing with that where it's like so small, but I'm really happy that they have that and having like I would honestly enter an 8-way Lynx tournament.
It sounds fun.
For that. Yeah, it's fun.
Sign us up next SHIRO cast. We're doing it there, but
that's the thing. It's the communal gaming that kind of makes it fun. Sharing
exactly.
So Saturn's back online via NetLink, right?
That's right.
And we've been having a lot of fun with a bunch of people in chat, and we're doing tournaments now and everything like that. So yeah, it's a lot more fun when you get to share it with other people, and that wasn't necessarily the case back in the day.
No.
If like you were pretty much like that lone Saturn fan. Maybe if you were lucky, you knew someone else. Or
I actually convinced friends of mine to ditch systems for Saturn back in the day. Like,
did you?
Primarily
wow,
N64s.
You get extra points.
Like I had 2 of my friends, they traded in their N60. I was like, dude, N64, look, you trade this in right now, you can get a Saturn in like 10 games because it was like 97, 98 when the games were cheap.
Yes.
And it's just like, these games are awesome. Like, let's just do it. And yeah, they actually followed and enjoyed the Saturn. I convinced them. So at least amazing. 3 of us, we all had Saturns and we're like living it up, buying all these games for like bargain basement prices.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've told this before, but like I got my Albert Odyssey from a dumpster at GameStop where a friend of mine worked because they still had the loose disc. And he's like, oh yeah, you can just take that. And he's like, I mean, if you want the case, I think we threw it out with the rest.
Oh my God.
So I just dug through the bin. I straight up did it. You do it for Saturn.
Of course.
Don't deny it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would dumpster dive for less, to be honest with you. But
I got about 5 games out of there, including a complete Albert Odyssey, and they were in perfect condition. They were just like set in there. It's not like they threw them around. So yeah, I got some games out of there.
Speaking about getting Saturn games, can you tell me about like how is it that you're able to acquire long box Saturn games in Germany?
Oh, I'll tell you that. That's easy.
In Germany.
It's because in Ramstein near here, there's an American military base, and it's been there for a very long time.
Very famous, based off of a famous band with the same name.
Precisely. Exactly. So they actually have the PX there on base where they would sell American stuff, right? And it's still like like if I go to the military base, I can smell Taco Bell and see it from across the road, but I'm not allowed in because I'm not a military serviceman. So I'm like, I just want to get in there and get some Taco Bell.
I want my Baja Blast, please.
Yeah, but they used to sell like, American video games and stuff there in the 90s. And obviously all the stuff that didn't sell like went to sit in some warehouse. So like small German game shops around here would like literally pick up crates of unsold stock of American games. That's why I got stuff like I have an Atomic Runner. I have a bunch of others I have a bunch of Sega Genesis games that are still sealed. Oh, I have a Cheeky Cheeky Boys US copy, Atomic Runner, a Shockin' the Forever Man, and a few others that are all like American Genesis games still sealed.
Wow.
They were just sold, and I got them for like dirt cheap.
You didn't have to compete with, because most German gamers are probably like nostalgic for like what they grew up with, right?
The PAL stuff, yeah. Except for my group of friends were all into NTSC, but they're mostly Japanese collectors. So
right.
But yeah, US stuff. It's the same with Saturn, and I'll tell you the big one is the stores we go to. They have a crate of American 3DO stuff, and they still have more in the back. And like it's just all these like long box 3DO games. So most of them still sealed.
Okay, I'll give you my address.
No, it's
just wild.
German road trip.
Let's do it. German.
We'll go with John, and we'll have a party, man. We're gonna party.
Heck yeah.
It's like we have a lot of 3DO. Like we're having video 3DO. It's like, oh, sorry, Dave, they don't have any 3DO at all. Sorry, Dave, my bad.
Right.
Yeah. So that's this weird thing in this part of Germany, especially, is just like these stores bought up this unsold stock, I guess, and they just keep it in their warehouse, and so you find a ton of these American games just sitting around all over the place, and it's usually, that's why, like, and it's funny looking at that document from Sega. It's like one of the most common things that I still find copies of Gen War just sitting in bins around here, like in the U.S. long boxes. Wow.
We had a German guy. His name was Momphis, but he actually got a Imaginary Rareth back in the day, and he always laments because. So yeah, that's the only time I ever saw that, and he sold it for I think like $20 or something. So it's like, and it was in Germany too. It's like I regret that every day of my life.
Dude, yeah, I know. And yeah, Sega CD stuff is out here as well.
Nice.
I got a Vive Working Designs and a couple others, long box Sega CD stuff. That's easy to get.
Do you agree that the boxes are like super fragile, like people say, like they explode if you look at them wrong? Or do you feel like if you just take care of your shit that it's fine?
I feel like if you just take care of your stuff, it's fine.
Yeah.
The problem is that because it's slightly brittle plastic, yes, I agree.
Right.
But because it's so big and there's so much heft to it that if you do drop it, it puts a lot of strain on the plastic hinges, and it's going to break.
There's a lot of empty space too. There's like, it's like kind of reverberates when you drop it. Yeah, that's true.
But my feelings on that changed when I experienced the European Dreamcast cases. And then I was like,
yeah.
They use that. Have you seen those thick blue cases?
Well, they had to fit like every language in the manual, right?
But those use the worst plastic I've ever seen.
They do.
It's just so cheap. Like they look kind of cool, but like that is truly one where you look at it the wrong way and it just cracks. Like the whole thing they're so bad. I don't know.
It doesn't age well.
No,
like it gets worse over time. Probably just the oxidation or whatever.
The only way it could have got worse is if it just yellowed as well, just to like get another kick.
Exactly.
Dreamcast itself, though, really well built.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. People don't seem to agree with me, but I think it's great that you can just take it apart with 4 screws.
Dreamcast had that really weird issue with discs, though, especially early on. So my launch unit, it read discs just fine, but some prints of some games wouldn't read properly on there, and it used to drive me nuts. And sometimes copies, like my Sonic Adventure launch copy works on my launch Dreamcast, but on no others. It won't boot on any other Dreamcast. Never figured out why. I remember buying Skies of Arcadia on day one, popped in disc 1, couldn't freaking read it. And I was like, what the hell?
Well, that sucks.
And then I put in disc 2 and it loaded to the main menu. And then I put in disc 1 and then it worked ever since. But I could never get it. I couldn't get it to boot it the first time. It just wouldn't do it. And that's crazy. That used to happen where like you'd get a Dreamcast game brand new, try to take it home, boot it wouldn't work. And you take it back, get a different copy, and it would work.
I never experienced that.
I had that a lot, and it was relate. You remember those early Dreamcasts, and some of those games have been weird issues at launch where they like made a second revision, like not the Midway stuff, but Sonic and Blue Stinger.
Sure,
they all had like shady discs out of the gate. That
Shenmue's notorious for that on disc 1.
Yeah,
like disc 1 is always like, I think Sam went through the SSG, went through like 5 copies. I went through like mine's broken. I went through 2. Still can't get a working copy, but I just use an ODE now, so I don't worry about it anymore.
There's definitely something with Dreamcast and discs that always gave me anxiety because you just never knew if it was going to work when you got it home, which never happened with the Saturn.
It's a pressing plant thing or it's the disc itself.
it was those proprietary Giga discs.
Yeah, those things were a bit shaky.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that they probably shouldn't have used them in the first place.
No.
I mean, all things considered,
But I mean, what else? They weren't going to use DVD because too expensive.
They should have.
Too expensive. Like 1998 when that system launched.
I think they should have taken a bath on that.
There's just no way though. Like 2 years in that time frame from 98 to 2000 is enough to make a gigantic difference in terms of cost. Like I don't think they could have afforded to launch a Dreamcast with DVD support just because.
Unless it's going to be $599.
I guess when you consider when they started developing, that's true.
Right. Yeah, like the DVD itself, it was released in late '96 in 96. Japan first, but it didn't actually show up until like early mid '97, I think, in the rest of the world. And even then, it was very new, it was so new. Sega had nothing to do with the standard either. So like for them, like a year out from Dreamcast DVDs hitting, there's just no way they could have engineered the system to include that disc and also make it like affordable.
And they have those in Japan. They have those like wide vision, or like their standard def, but like wide TVs, CRTs with the
new stuff, their formats and stuff.
We have a wide CRTs over in Europe too. There's a ton of those for some reason, including have you ever seen? There's a Sony PVM in the old style, like the old 20M2 style, but there's a widescreen variant that I've seen.
Yeah, we saw that before. It's
really weird. It's like a really fat wide boy, and I'm like, what the heck is this? It's the Sony had HD, the first like high vision players back in like late 80s, early 90s. I think. Where there's a big HD widescreen tubes. It's freaking nuts that existed.
Yeah, it's crazy because Japan actually broadcasted it over the air for a while, and it's like, who's watching it? All of 5 people that have the TV that can afford it.
Just crazy that exists.
I swear that's on my bucket list. Is I want one of those Hitachi like wide. It's like standard def, but it's wide, and I guess you could do like anamorphic stuff on it. Like Knights would look phenomenal on that.
Bomberman.
But yeah, I forget what the model number was, but it's in that Saturn Perfect mag,
Yeah.
And it's got a terminal on the front. It's got a Saturn port and with the little Saturn logo, and it's like,
wow.
I'll keep an eye out on Yahoo Auctions for that, but I doubt they'll ship it to America.
They're not going to ship it.
I just wonder if anybody even has one over there because it takes up space, and over there, space is not really something premium, that they have a lot of. Exactly. So they probably would have scrapped it, which is sad, but
happens. But yeah, no, I really want those as well. But hopefully one day we'll get somebody will find it on a crate or something. But
still, I'm more of a 4x3 guy for this stuff because there's just not enough widescreen content back then.
That's true. I mean, it was rare to get stuff like that, but you would have like Panzer Zwei and you had Knights. There were a few games that took advantage of it, but you're right. I mean, most of it is 4x3.
All right. What's the next word?
Okay, the next word? Well, okay, fine. Dreamcast, since we were just on that. Let's just go Dreamcast. And
I was asking anyway, so that's good.
The Sonic Adventure trailer from 98 that I saw for the first time in a small postage stamp and was thinking like, oh my god, look at this. This is insane.
Was it in a DivX format or whatever? Through the
I don't even remember, but it was small, it was crappy, but it was enough to see what the game looked like. And I just remember digging up MP3s of the soundtrack wherever I could and just getting very excited for Dreamcast. My hype went up real quick after seeing that.
CD sitting like in classes, just listening to Open Your Heart or like My Sweet Passion, just on repeat.
When I finally played it, and I loved it at the time, I did feel a little bit betrayed because all the early previews you read, everybody's like, "Oh man, it's a smooth 60 frames per second," and all that. It's not 60, it's 30, and it slows down, but I still loved it.
Were you like really already about frame rate back then?
I was already back.
Yeah.
Yeah, the game that made me about frame rate was actually Daytona.
Oh, yeah.
I remember seeing the arcade. I didn't even understand what frame rate was, but I remember seeing this and I was like,
You just knew.
this is so smooth.
Yes.
And I wanted that at home.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to get, like, even on a high-end PC, it was like, man, like this just looks so good. And then, you know, I started to learn from there, but that was one of those things where it's just like, that fluidity is so insane looking. That looks unlike anything else I've ever seen in 3D.
Right.
It just
And I
looks
want
so
that.
smooth. You're so used to like the 30. Yeah.
I just figured it was one of those things where it was the arcade and we just would never have that.
Right.
So what would you say was the game, the console game that did it? Like, what was the 3D console game that did it?
Well, even though there was 60 on Saturn and PlayStation that impressed, it was actually for the first time seeing a Japanese Dreamcast in like early '99 running Virtua Fighter 3 TB. Now, when you do the comparison, you're like, okay, yeah, the Model 3 definitely looks better. But at the time, I was like, this looks just like the Model 3 board. This looks like the arcade, and look how smooth it is. Like, I was so blown away by that level of fluidity, which I'd never seen in a home console before, or even on the PC. Like 3D that was that detailed and smooth and fluid. It was mind-blowing. So yeah, seeing that for the first time was when I feel like I finally got it at home. But then it was followed by some disappointments, of course. You know, beyond Sonic, the big crushing one for me was Sega Rally 2. I remember getting my hands on that and being like, what did they do? And ever since then,
It's not terrible, but it just falls short of what you hoped it would be.
yeah,
you know?
it's like, well, the problem is like by default, it runs with this unlocked frame rate, but it's like double buffered. So like it's mostly 30 frames per second, but then you get these like spikes where it's 60 and it's that going from 30 to 60 and then back. That's really jarring. Like if it was just 30 all the time, which you can kind of do with a code, it's much more playable.
Oh, you can do that with a code?
Yeah, there's a way to like lock it down to 30. Which
It's
is
sad,
a
though.
big deal.
It's like,
it should have been 60 though, right? Like
Sure.
I remember thinking, like I saw Virtua Fighter and I was thinking this was going to be the same thing, and it just wasn't. It was not smooth. It looked worse than the arcade, but I was still excited for the system, of course. But that was like the chink in the armor where you're like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't quite the Model 3 at home that I had expected, but
Right.
But that's also what turned me against the Windows CE logo. Because you see
Oh,
that,
yeah.
I remember seeing like Windows CE at boot up,
Yes.
which that confused everybody. So like, oh, the Dreamcast runs Windows. It's like, no, it's just like a different library that they used to create.
Yeah, nobody really knew what that meant back then, the embedded CE.
They didn't understand what that meant.
Exactly.
In Windows CE, I mean, it was really just designed to help make it easier to port PC games, I would say, to the Dreamcast for developers not familiar with the more low-level APIs, right? Like
and there's quite
PC
a lot
devs.
of them. Like Slave Zero, I think was the biggest one for me. That was
Slave Zero was a CDI kind of experience. I say that because if you remember, they were not able to play music in Slave Zero and Dreamcast. And I remember in an interview they gave, like, yeah, we couldn't figure out how to get the music and the sound effects at the same time. And it was just,
Really?
I would say it's bad engineering.
I always thought that was an aesthetic choice. I never because I only
It was
played
not.
Dreamcast
The
version.
PC version has music.
No, because that's why I loved it because there's like it was like so like eerie as like no music, just was like pure gameplay, and I thought
I know that
it was
it was
vibe.
not
It's, like-
intentional.
and then if you get multiplayer, don't even bother on Dreamcast. It is a lag fest.
Yeah.
Don't even try it. But
Yeah,
I love that
that's-
game though. But yeah, still. It's,
Windows CE, baby. That's it's bad. It was a horrible thing for them in the end. I'm sure it helped some games get made, but almost everything that was Windows CE runs poorly.
Runs pretty bad.
It's
Yeah.
not a good choice.
It's like, okay, it's there, but let's not.
But then again, a lot of those games may not have ever come to Dreamcast then because they were able to work with like more familiar like DirectX style, or maybe it was DirectX style, but basically an easier way to
Yeah.
convert this stuff, just writing the games in C, and rather than having to dig into the assembly code of the low level API and stuff like that.
Well, speaking of Windows, let's do the Direct Xbox. What do you think of when you think of the original Xbox?
I think of that lady standing next to the mech doing the choreography.
Right.
Remember that?
Yeah, like controlling the giant mech. Yeah, that was like their tech demo, right?
I also think of that, and I think of Malice.
Malice.
The game with that girl with the giant hammer that just screams like early 2000s America kind of graphic design.
Yeah, exactly.
More like just Western style. Is that like
It's looking like
no, that was
the
actually
Bratz
not
dolls.
American. It was an Argonaut developed game, which is even weirder because Argonaut, of course, but that era of Argonaut from the makers of Croc. But
I just like
Malice
the
didn't come out until
deceptive box art.
2004, and then it even came out on PS2 as well for some reason.
Wow.
It's a really weird thing, but that was one of the earliest things they showed on Xbox. And early Xbox was full of these like throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Like the Azaric and Bloodwake and
Blinks
all that kind of stuff. Bruce Lee, the Obi-Wan game, which was horrendous. Like most of the early Xbox stuff was really, really bad.
It
Like
was
so
really
bad.
Yeah.
Like it's so bad where you think like, man, if they did not have Bungie and Halo, would they have even survived? Like Halo was so good.
That was their killer app.
They got so lucky with that because everything else that they were doing on the West Side was terrible.
It was like their Mario 64. I mean, Mario 64 was powerful enough to sell 64s for the first.
Exactly right. Not to say, I mean, Xbox did launch with good stuff. Like they had Dead or Alive 3, which was awesome. They had Project Gotham Racing, which was like the MSR sequel, which was really good. So they had good stuff out of the beginning. But yeah, Halo was the thing. Like without Halo, there may have been no more Xbox because it was the only thing that was so good to get people to like really want to jump onto that system because all their other first party stuff during that first year or two was just vile. Like it was bad.
Didn't the Splinter Cell stuff start on Xbox?
It did, but that didn't come until I mean, I guess that came a year late. It was 2002.
Yeah.
It was late, like November 2002. So that helped for sure because that was a real
Ghost
showpiece.
Recon was big too. My uncle played it.
Yeah, but that was more PC focused, where Splinter Cell like started on Xbox, right? It was made for Xbox before going elsewhere, whereas Ghost Recon was like this offshoot of Rainbow Six, which, of course, Rainbow Six was one of those games that was like known as the most delayed Dreamcast game for a while.
Yeah,
if you remember that, the whole saga of Rainbow Six.
Right.
It finally did come out though. It wasn't very good.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Rainbow Six one is didn't age that well to begin with, but
No.
Xbox was really the first console where you could really do like pretty faithful PC ports and have it come off like, I mean, yeah, you don't have the mouse and keyboard, but for the most part, like it was quite playable, and you didn't feel like you were missing.
It was the best we ever. Yep, the best there ever was.
Yeah,
at the time. No, we did get some. There was some decent PC ports on other platforms, like Deus Ex on PS2 is like shockingly great, which was impressive as a conversion. But by and large, PC ports, that was something Xbox could actually deliver on. It wasn't always perfect, but you could get some damn good results.
You could, yeah.
Like the fact that something like Morrowind works at all, even though it runs terribly, but the fact that it does work, you can actually play a game like that on a console, like nothing else. You couldn't do that anywhere else. It was only possible on an Xbox in the console space.
Yeah, and it definitely helped bridge that divide between the PC and the console gamers to the point where it's like, oh, why am I going to get this giant PC where I can just play it on Xbox instead and play with, all my dude bros, play some Halo, hop on Ghost Recon, play some MB. Like it just was an interesting console, and you can kind of see the evolution of where it was going. But yeah, like you said, it like they threw everything at it. Like you had like the Blinkses, you had the Mouses, you had all the weird games. And
I actually like Blinks, but
and you had the
Blinks
really good
good
LAN support. So it was like I remember delivering a pizza to a house where they had like 6 CRTs and a bunch of Xboxes set up, and they were playing Halo
and a ton of beers.
And a ton of beer.
I think it was 4. You can only do a max of 4 for one copy of Halo.
Is that right? Okay, this was Halo 2.
Did that.
This was Halo 2 they were playing.
Halo 2 is the same, I think. I don't think you can, unless, well, maybe with Xbox Live, actually, it's possible.
I'm not exactly sure.
But as far as local LAN support, we used to do that at my university all the time. We would not rent out, but we would take over like this like common house in the middle, and set up projectors on each Xbox, so they were huge.
Oh my god!
And then we would play 4-player split screen on each Xbox with 4 Xboxes networked together, and these 16-player games.
Wow!
And then we would record it all on VHS and like create highlight reels after the match.
I'm jealous. That sounds wild. Amazing.
We played so much Halo in college. It was good lord, it was fun.
I definitely wish I was there for that. I was more Halo 3 in college, but even then, like when Halo 3 came out, it's like by that time Halo kind of died down, and it was all about like, you know, I actually don't know what was really popular in the 2000s. I actually stopped playing a lot of games around that time, the 2010s.
Modern Warfare, probably.
Modern Warfare,
I've had this controversial opinion where Call of Duty Modern Warfare, I blame it for ruining multiplayer for myself.
No,
I know people love it, but I think that was the game that destroyed multiplayer for me. In fact, I think that game caused so much damage to the industry as a whole that I've come to, you know, I respect what it does now, the series, but I've always had this resentment for that era of Call of Duty, because
I think it definitely resulted in everybody wanting to make like a first-person shooter like that.
No, it's not. So it's not just that. The big thing for me is that, and it seems smart at the time, but what if we put RPG stuff into a shooter? So you're leveling up. Every match has like, you know, you gain experience points, you gain credits, you're buying weapons. Let's do that. And I feel like that specific decision, designed to get people to keep playing, ended up filtering out across every genre and changed the face of gaming forever. In a way that I don't really love, like this focus of everything has to have these like leveling up systems and filling the bars and making the meters bigger and unlocking stuff. It's no longer just about playing the game. That's what shifted it from like, you know, Halo 1 to, you know, Unreal Tournament, Quake 3, like getting out of that sort of just like you're just playing because it's fun to like, I got to play this to like fill this meter and unlock this stuff. And again, I respect that people like it. I'm not denying that it's good for them. It's just for me personally, it kind of ruined it all and I just don't like it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you, because like I feel it like it turned the game from, oh, everyone has a chance to, oh, it's a, if you're the best, you're gonna keep being the best because you have like, oh, all these kill streaks, all the helicopters coming out, all this, you know, all these advantages, all the stronger guns, and it's like with Halo or like something like, you know, like that, where it's like, oh, everyone has a chance. You spawn, get a gun, you know where the gun is, and you can find it. Like it's just like very
much skill based.
Yeah, it's skill based, and it turned to, oh, just keep playing a lot and unlock all the crazy weapons.
Call of Duty is still very much skill based, I would say, but it's a different type of skill, and it's it's everybody's focused on the meta now rather than just having a good old time.
It's like if I want to focus on meta, I'll just play more Warhammer 40k. That's all the meta I need.
And the problem there is that I think it actually like it now it's progressed to the point where people will look at a game that doesn't have those and like, well, why would I play it if I don't get anything for winning?
Yeah, it's like,
you know what I mean?
Like,
and that's the attitude that I'm like, oh man, like
you're missing.
They've really lost something there. Whereas they only view it as like, well, I'm wasting my time if I'm not earning things.
I think that's really what Tribes of Sin kind of failed in a way, because like I remember there was really big and was about it. Then like it's like, oh well, it doesn't have all this, so let's not focus and play on it. It's not, you know, that. And
there's no meters to fill.
Exactly. And it's like I just want to come home. I want to play, like that's why I only play Counter-Strike Source anymore, because like I come home, load up Counter-Strike Source, play the servers, kill a bit, and then turn it off, and it's like that's what I want. I don't want, you know, I don't want to commit. I don't want to grind these games. I'm an adult. I have a life. I got podcasts to do. Like I got stuff I gotta do.
Eventually it turns into I gotta do my dailies in these games where everybody's like, you know, I have to do all these things every single day. And
it's like, what am I doing with my life?
It's not even.
It takes the fun out of it.
I don't know. It feels more like an addiction than pure fun.
Yeah.
But that's just me, crotchety old guy, rambling about this stuff.
I mean, I mean, we're all kind of old guys yelling at the sky at some point. You know?
I mean, I am literally the old man yelling at the cloud, like as in cloud gaming.
Gaming.
That's what I do.
Wah, wah.
It's like, release it on disc, damn it.
Pat, hit him with the next word. What do you got?
Limited run games. Well, I guess that's 3 words, but just pretend I put them all together. LRG. There we go.
I think of RZ now, which is the game that I've been contributing to with Seth.
Oh, you're working on that?
Dopley. Yeah, so I'm really happy.
I'm hyped for RZ.
So yeah, that's been fun over the last year and a half and some change.
Audi's there too, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
He's the one that made this happen. Without him,
I
he
just I just
joined
did some
them,
work
and
for him. Yeah,
oh yeah, Audie's great.
Mhm.
Exactly.
he's a
The
cool
Norwe
dude.
he's the Forrest Gump of the games industry.
How did you guys
Where
hook up? You and Audi.
I mean, it's the same way. It's like that's why I call him the Forrest Gump of the industry. He's just everywhere, and like
everywhere.
all these weird situations. But we met up first at Gamescom, but actually he like reached out of the blue on just through a message board, and we just chatted from there. And yeah, and then I discovered he's got his fingers in every pie in the industry that nobody knows. No, it's amazing. So
we actually need to get him on here. I understand he's a very big Japanese Saturn fan. Like he loves the Japanese Saturn library.
He is a passion about everything, and I love that. That's why we get along so well, because we just appreciate all that. But he especially loves bad games though too.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's a collector of Phoenix games.
Oh,
I don't know if
the classics.
you're familiar with Phoenix games, yeah?
Yeah.
Love them.
That stuff is something.
Yeah.
It's a lot of UK only releases too. PAL releases only, right?
PAL releases, and they're all like they were all designed to be on the store shelf, like at the checkout, and like like an Aldi or something, where you're like, oh, what's this? And you pick it up, and they're all garbage, except for like occasionally they would like publish a game that is like the Toge series that Cave did, the racing series. Toge 3 for PlayStation 2 got released over here as like Road Rage 3 or something by Phoenix Games with a generic cover.
Wow.
Right? And Road Rage, like what is it? But you know how the Toge series is, right? Like it has nothing to do with driving angry or road rage.
No.
Like the name doesn't even make sense, but you get it, and it's like, oh, it's actually like a good game in here. So that happened like once or twice, but most of their stuff is like vile.
What about the mobile light force? That
that wasn't Phoenix, but yes, it's the
same kind of thing. Yeah.
Shikigami no Shiro, right?
No, that was it was Gunbird on the PS1 for the.
Oh, it was actually Gunbird. So the set Mobile Light Force 2, I think was that.
Yeah,
was Shikigami.
Yeah.
And then you're right, Gunbird was Mobile Light Force 1. I do like the idea of taking like generic characters like that and making a series like Mobile Light Force, like have like Mobile Light Force 6, but they just pull from like any random shooter from Japan, right? But they insert those generic characters into them, so you have like a series of games that's based on multiple series of games. That'd be funny. That's pretty funny.
You just get it's like, oh yeah, it's a Toho game. It's like, oh dang, all right, let's go Mobile Light Force 4, Toei 4, Toho number 4, let's go. But yeah, it's just bizarre that like these releases happen, and it's kind of funny because I discovered that just because I looked on, because we were doing a podcast on Gunbird or like the Shadow Shmups.
Oh yeah, nice.
And I was like, wait, it got a U.S. release on something I thought it was Japan only, and it's like, what are we looking at? And it's like I looked at Mobile Light Force, like, oh, that's what happened.
Mobile Light Force. Gunbird.
Classic. But yeah, I did want to thank you for doing RZ, because it's been doing a lot more. Like people are making YouTube poops of that, like right out the gate. So thank you.
Well, the main guy on it, Dopley, he is like Mr. YouTube poop. He was way into that stuff, and has developed a real appreciation for it. His actually first thing is he re-released the Zelda CDI games. So he's the guy that reprogrammed those and released them.
Wait, what do you mean he re-released them?
Didn't you ever see that? If you look for like the Zelda CDI games remakes, he released them for PC some years ago.
Oh, that's crazy. I didn't even
And he
know
remade
about that.
them. They play significantly better, but it's all like using the original assets and stuff, and kind of. So he put that together, and then this was kind of born out of wanting to do his own thing and like make it original and good, but also staying true to the CDI Zelda. So it's like CDI Zelda, but good is the idea.
I'm excited for ours though. Like I saw it, I'm like, that's a day one pre-order for me. I'm buying that for sure.
It's genuinely fun. It plays really well now. It actually, game design wise, I would say we've kind of ended up at a place where I would say it's more like Monster World style.
Ooh,
right?
Like
yeah.
Where it's not a Metroidvania, but you're going in and out of different levels, but it's kind of non-linear, where you go into like first level and you're like, oh, here's an area or a thing. I can't get to this now because I don't have the power. So you have to go to another place, talk to someone, you do something else in another level, and then now you have this power. And you're like, oh, if I go back to level 1, now I can access this area, which is a different area. And oh, now there's a boss here that I couldn't get to before that I didn't even realize was there. And it's kind of like slowly peeling back the layers, visiting and revisiting levels on the way to the end. And I like that kind of design, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out.
I'm glad to hear. I'm glad it's going along well. I saw the trailer for that in the LRG thing. And I'm like, I'm buying that. But yeah, when was the release that you guys are looking for that? I'm not sure if there was a.
I don't know if it's been announced, so I do not know. Unless it was in the trailer, I can't say anything on that either.
Fair. But no, I'm just really excited for it to drop, and yeah, I just want to thank you guys for doing your hard work on that. I'm really excited to give that a play, and I'm gonna see if I can make Dave play that too.
Oh, definitely.
You should definitely give it a try.
What do you think about the Carbon engine?
Oh, I think it's a cool initiative. To basically, I mean, the idea being like building your own emulation in-house, which is cool, rather than just like, reusing what exists. I always respect that. But then I really like how they're focusing on making like real packages that like keep the spirit alive of the game. The upcoming so actually, before I say that, the thing that makes me say this in the first place has to do with those Ratalaika releases. Ratalaika, Steve Snake's company.
Right.
Their emulation is actually quite good. But they use the exact same like generic menu system for every single release, to the point where it may as well just be like an emulator front end rather than like a proper package. Right. So as a result, it just ends up feeling a little bit generic and uninteresting, and I don't like that.
Like it's just an emulation front end kind of thing, and
the
ROM is just dropped in there kind of. That's what it kind of feels like. Versus like Carbon Engine, where everything is very bespoke to where the end user has like a really nice experience.
Exactly. So that's the main thing, is like just making it feel bespoke and fun and actually like worthy of its own package. I think that is really, really cool and separates their releases from the typical stuff. So yeah.
How do you feel about like the overall performance of it versus like, what would you say Carbon Engine versus like FPGA?
Oh, very different thing. I mean, FPGA is focused on replicating hardware, and it's meant to have the whole library there. This is just like packaging games up in their own individual like release, with a physical release that you can play on a modern platform, and the performance is meant to be very accurate and smooth with good options in there. Unfortunately, I think the first game they picked to release was the River City Girls, which was like I forget it was one of the Kunio-kun games back from Super Famicom, but all of those games run like butt, like on real hardware, like the performance is bad. Like those games run like garbage, and so does the Carbon version, because it's accurate. It runs it exactly like the real hardware, but it gives you this bad first impression. But it has nothing to do with their work. It's just that's how the game is. It's super janky.
It's like, we made it accurate. I mean, we didn't make it. We couldn't make it better, but we made it accurate. So
right. In some cases, you can actually improve things via emulation, but I think with a lot of games like that and the way they're built, like trying to fix it is really potentially makes it break in a way that they can, because they don't have the source code for this stuff, so it's all kind of hacking around it and doing what they can that way, and fixing deep-seated performance issues depending on where they're coming from. Like there are some ways to do that on Super NES, like with those hacks that Vitor Vieira in Brazil's been doing, with the SA1 hacks.
Oh, okay,
where basically solving performance issues. That stuff's really cool, but it's not always feasible.
I think my favorite one that they did recently is on the Bunny one for the Game Boy. I forgot the name of it off the top of my head, but they did a recoloring of it to make it a DX version of it, and they actually added coloring to the game. I can't remember what the name is.
I love this game, and for some reason I'm also.
Are you talking about Trip World?
Trip World, yes.
That's it.
Trip World.
I feel so bad. I did the subtitle and I completely forgot what the game.
It's Trip World, yes.
Yeah, no, they did a wonderful job on that.
Yeah, that's probably the best example yet, because they actually went back and got the whole thing colorized. And it's not just colorizing it, it's like they actually went back to one of the original creators, the designer in Japan that worked on the game, and he's the one that signed off on all the color palette choices to make sure that it like actually adhered to his original vision. So it's like extremely authentic in a way that's just awesome.
Yeah, no, it looks great. I'm super excited for the drop. I'm definitely getting a copy of that. I love the Game Boy the Game Boy version of that. I'm definitely at the DX play on that, the analog pocket. That's gonna be my weekend when that comes out. But yeah, one of the things that I was curious about, maybe you can get your opinion on, is what I like about the Carbon Engine is the possibility to get fan translations or translations done of games that never got, localized releases or translations. And I was wondering, do you think it would ever be possible for, say them taking a fan translation and putting it on for either from like the SNES or something like that, or, or like, maybe some other console that they're able to emulate at this point and take that, like even like maybe Policenauts on the PS1 and put that into that and release that? Or is that a complicated thing that might not be?
I can't speak for them for sure here, but I'd imagine it's feasible but complicated, right? There's so many things with rights you have to go through between the companies, the translators. Using fan translations also tends to be kind of a dicey thing because with legal, so they might want to do it in house. But I mean, it's not that it's not possible. It's just there's a lot of stuff to dance around, I'd imagine. Again, I can't speak to that per se. I don't, but it seems possible, but difficult.
Yeah, because I figured that'd be a good way to, because my thing is working with I know it's a lot really complicated, but I figured, with the fans already having that translated and maybe seeing like the cost of either compensating the fan project with the fan translation, giving the rights to that and putting that on there versus doing a full in-house translation, a translator, proofread when the work's all done. That it might make more financial sense to do that, but I mean, I can see where the rights issues and the whole legality of that would run into that. But that's one of the big things I'm very passionate about is getting these games to the fans and not having to you have to patch this game, you have to download this, rip the the disc one image of it, and because a lot of people as easy as they made it nowadays, there are a lot of people that really don't want to do that. They just want to, sit down, pop it in and play it, and, it's just and it's like, I'd love for there to be a legal way to do that. And it's like, maybe that's sort of what I'm hoping for the Carbon engine moving forward is doing something like that would be a great way to use it if possible.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I also wish they could beyond Carbon, re-releases of games. Like they're doing the Game Boy Color and Game Boy cartridges for Trip World, which is cool. Mm-hmm. But man, it would be cool if they could do Saturn releases.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's 100% off the table just because they can't. You'd have to crack the security on Saturn in a way. Well, the security's known, but it's how do you actually burn those discs? How do you make those discs? I don't think there's any plants that could actually do that. Right.
We have a guy that was looking into it right now, looking into the wobble on our side, but it's it's completely complicated, and it's you actually have to manufacture it in a specific way.
That's what I mean.
And it seems doable, but it's it would require a lot of work and research. But I mean, if you had enough money, if you had enough money,
I don't think they. I mean, who's going to want to invest that kind of money to make that possible for Sega Saturn these days?
I've definitely seen crazier that's been, but I
would love it. That would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah. So our buddy Ben is an entrepreneur who also works with he has factories and stuff like that, and he might be crazy enough to do it. He's definitely mentioned that he wants to do it and that he thinks it's possible from an engineering standpoint. But again, talking about it and executing on it are two different things. So I just told him hey man, pat on the back, go for it.
That would be the dream. Ben, come on, Ben,
you can do this, right?
Buddy. We're counting on you.
But besides that, you'd have to when we talked about it, if you want to do that, you'd have to either come with a stipulation you need a pseudo cart or a burnt thing to use it, or you'd have to include it with the game, which would probably make it astronomically
that would be expensive. But also again, the Saturn cart slot being what it is, it's not even a guarantee that it would work. It's just not worth it. There's so many potential issues
it's
there.
How are you gonna troubleshoot that with all the customers, right?
I hate that cart slot.
I do too. I do too.
Some of it I blame is using stuff like Action Replays in the past with the non-beveled cart edges. But even without that,
even when you don't though,
even when you don't, it's just there's something really flaky about that slot. It just was not well manufactured.
Every time I put a cart in there, I feel like I'm just destroying it a little bit more, So it's and we have to for content creation. It's we're going between the Netlink cart when we're doing that stuff, tournaments or anything like that, and half the time it's you don't even know. You have to boot up into Saturn Bomberman and see that it actually boots into the Netlink side because you won't know if it's properly seated even if it boots into the Netlink side, there may be a pin that's like not properly seated, and then you don't have a connection, with your buddy, and then you have to like reseat it, and then
it's like
of
the
course,
worst, man.
Yeah, it's just it's terrible. It's terrible. You just want something that you can just leave in there and just forget about it. But yeah, so
you might as well. I literally think now I just have Saturns that have specific peripherals plugged into it. Like I have one with the Netlink, I have another one with the RAM card. I'm just gonna leave it in there and just swap the Saturns. It's a lot easier to swap it and take out the ODE, pop up, and then just do that. As dumb as that sounds.
And those pins, they're so tiny. Like the connector, they're just so tiny, and you can't like get at it from underneath and like bend them back or anything like that. It's like, I've heard people trying different crazy stuff, but some folks say that if you take a screwdriver and you just loosen the screws on both sides of it, that helps. And then other folks are like, if you jam a credit card behind and it kind of like forces the cart forward a little bit, that helps. But I mean, all that stuff is anecdotal, and it may or may not work depending on your experience. But yeah,
super annoying.
It's crazy. There's also put the cart in and then pull it up like a 0.5 millimeter so that it like grips.
I've had it go out even during games. I think it was one of the Samurai Showdown games I'm playing, and it's like all of a sudden all the sprites go corrupt and everything's like broken looking, but the game's still running, but you're like, oh, well, crap.
I think that's a common issue. Are you using the third-party RAM thing, the Action Replay RAM, when you do that, or?
I'm using the one
Japanese.
Maybe
RAM
I had the
card,
wrong cart, but I was using the one that came with like one of the King of Fighters games.
Because I know that's.
I can't remember if it was the one. I think it was the 1 megabyte one, probably.
Because some of them have issues where if you pause it and you leave it for an extended period of time and unpause it, it'll corrupt for some reason, and nobody.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I have a bunch of Saturn carts. I have the 1, I have the 4, I have the pseudo Saturn, I have some third-party RAM thing, I have the memory cartridge, all those different things.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing about the memory cartridges, was it one of you guys that told me the trick about recovering it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I told you that, and Peter told me that.
I can't believe that worked.
It works. And so that's why, because it corrupted my Shining Force 3 save.
Yeah.
I lost my Shining Force 3 save, and I'd poured so many hours into that, and then I was able to. So luckily I was able to get it back, but yeah, that was crazy.
What was the method, just for people that are listening that don't know?
So the method is this is going to scare some folks, but you go in and you go into the memory manager and you say format. Okay. And it's like, are you sure you want to format your backup cart? And you say yes. And as soon as you click yes, you power off the console. And when you boot it back up, it will not have actually finished a format. It will have just gotten rid of the last thing that was written to it, which basically solves the problem and unbricks it, But so you
end up with like one corrupted save file, but the rest
whatever
fine.
The last thing that you wrote to it that happens to be the corrupted article gets deleted, and everything else is. And once you get it back, you're like, okay, I got to back this up with like Slinga's save game copier
the Saturn
or whatever.
Saving setup is just it's pretty bad. I mean, between the unreliable RAM carts and then needing to change the battery, you never really feel safe with your Saturn save data in a way that you do with like a PlayStation memory card, for instance, right? Where it just kind of feels
so now with the satiator, and I realize not everybody can afford the satiator, but like with the satiator, it's great to just have like Slinga's copier as I have it in a separate folder, and it's just like you can just dump the contents of the cart or the contents of the internal memory at any time, and I do often. If you have the satiator and you use rings, which is like the special menu, you can do per game save as well. So it has like a separate folder for There's some cool things about that. Now Fenrir can do it as well. You can dump saves to the SD card with Fenrir as well.
It's a lot of
it's more work.
I think.
It's more work, and there are other ways you can get it off. Now there's a QR. There's a software and I forget who took credit for this, but yeah, there's a piece of software that will, for folks who don't have that, can basically run this software off of like a burn disk, and it will create a QR code on the screen that you can snap a photo of with your phone and basically get the data off for like archival. Now getting it back on is another thing. You're gonna have to have like some kind of SD card or something with an ODE.
Or like what you could do is also you could put it on a disk as well. Like you can burn a disk and burn the
That's
save.
true. You can burn the saves to the disk and get it on that way too. So for people who are really against getting an ODE for whatever reason. Mostly, usually it's just because of the cost, But yeah, it's crazy. You're absolutely right. There's more options with the PlayStation, honestly. Like at the time back in the day, I saw the Saturn's internal memory as a good thing. I was like, wow, well, the PlayStation doesn't have that, like built-in memory, But yeah, for what it's worth, with the battery dying and at random times.
No, I guess you're right. It's much better today, but I was thinking more from like when the Saturn was still current enough. And I remember back in the day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
When I first discovered like, the battery can die. I actually didn't realize that at the time and lost tons of saves that way. And yeah.
Oh yeah. We've only had these solutions in the last few years. In fact, when we started doing this podcast, we didn't even have any of this stuff. And there wasn't even a Saturn ODE yet. There was Rhea and Phoebe.
There was one, but literally you had to fight for your life to get one. It's like you had to go on a website at like 3 a.m. and there's like 5 that are put up, and it sold out instantaneously. The only way we got one is our buddy Kay was a distributor for a US of it. And he's like, do you guys want one? To hold on one for you for a US distribution? I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
That's the only way I got one, because it's either that or wake up at 5 a.m. and fight 50 people for 5, and it's like that's.
And now there's several. It's crazy. Saturn is actually pretty well supported in terms of ODEs now.
Yeah, it's got a lot of options. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so there's no bad options. There's so many, like, you just pause the video right now and buy one if you want. Like, there's no like.
Well, I would say Satiator probably seems like the best option because you can keep your optical drive, right?
You can keep your optical. That's true. Yeah, and honestly, if you're doing content creation or if you're running conventions and stuff like that, it's worth its weight in gold. Like Patton, everyone at PRGE had a Satiator, and we were able to just like plug it in. We use that on the Pluto as well. Just plug it into the Pluto, and have folks be able to like play the Pluto. Yeah, because you don't want to have to like be putting discs in and out and stuff like that. Really mess around with that thing. No. Just we had like a wireless Bluetooth control, and just like nobody gets to touch the Pluto. Just you can play it.
Right.
Yeah.
Knock off a shelf, because Adam Korlick was like, yeah, I appreciate it, because like I didn't want it. Now I don't have to worry about it getting knocked off a table. It's like worst case they steal a controller. Whoop-de-doo. That's great. They're not losing like the specialized ones or anything like that. And it's really crazy as how in the recent years all this Saturn peripherals are coming out for it. That it's great. But yeah, it's like
Sega loves that stuff, man. They love their peripherals and weird offshoots and all kinds of hardware, because how else would they decorate their warehouse?
Exactly. 2000 was it 200,000 32Xs and stuff?
Exactly.
Oh yeah, and the Saturn peripherals were one of the worst. Like the hardware itself was like, I mean, they were selling some of it, but I mean, it was the peripherals that was ridiculous. Oh yeah. Oh, and the steering wheel is terrible. I have it right there. It's so bad. Like it's only good for a couple games. Formula Karts, which is like a PAL release. It actually is great with Formula Karts. I don't know what it is, but
that's weird.
It feels great. It like if you've ridden a go-kart and that feeling of kind of like really like drifting around a corner and having the go-kart slip and stuff like that, and the feeling of the steering wheel, you're really close to the ground too when you're on a go-kart. For some reason, the Saturn Racer works great with Formula Karts, and it's one of the only games. I guess maybe it helps on like that motorcycle game because it's analog.
Manx TT.
Well, not Manx TT. It's the other one that's terrible.
Super Hang
on GP 95.
Oh,
yeah, so like that's almost uncontrollable with the digital pad, but with the Racer, it's actually you kind of get a grip on it. That it also works with the 3D control pad, but again, the 3D control pad basically just registers as like a racing wheel, basically.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably has nothing to do with it, but I'm pretty sure it's because of the go-kart. The wheel looks like a go-kart, anyways.
Yeah.
Go-kart steering wheel. So
kind of. But it's like bow shaped, isn't it? Kind of
weird.
Like a bow tie.
It's kind of like a Formula One, because that's kind of how Formula One wheels were like. Yeah,
I guess that's true.
They were that weird kind of with the paddle shifters.
Yeah.
Remember playing Daytona with that? It's like super sensitive. It's like you move it a little bit, you're going left and right. It's like awful.
Speaking of racing and everything, we got to start pumping the brakes on this. Because we're coming up on like 2.5 hours, and I'm looking for a way to like smooth transition and wrap this up. But
just grab that racing wheel and steer to the exit.
Yeah, I just want to say before I go, I just want to thank you a lot for shouting us out on all the shows of the podcast that you do, because even the last one you did was really nice of you.
Yeah.
Nice of you to do with that. So thank you so much for shouting us out, and like we try to do the same for you. I mean, definitely, we love talking about your content. We love your stuff. We love the podcast and all
Absolutely.
the content you do with other people, like with My Life in Gaming and everybody else. So we really appreciate that.
Appreciate your attention to detail and your just commitment to
And I appreciate what you guys are doing, because it's keeping the Saturn alive in a way that's fun to listen to and sort of re-exploring the library. And of course, all that stuff is awesome. It really it brings me back, and Richard appreciates it too, being that he was trying to keep the Saturn dream alive so hard in the 90s with the magazine.
That means a lot to us that he likes our content. That means a lot.
You got a copy of the magazine, right? Did you get it?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's gorgeous. Very professional.
Awesome. Nice. I'm glad. Well, really appreciate you coming on and appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So until next time, this has been SaturnDave, TraynoCo, and John Linneman of DF Retro reminding you that you must play Sega Saturn.
Play your Sega Saturn.
See you next time.
Peace.
セガサターンしろ